and streamage.
Maybe we won't
And-
mention anybody by name,
Welcome. No, of course.
but we will
We can keep examples
discuss
in
the happenings a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so this is Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 64, welcomes. We have been discussing APS
Language, yeah.
language stack for the last 4 plus. Anyways, that discussion isn't quite done. We may get into that. We may come back into that.
Yeah, this is our working proposal for what the book is leading to, which still needs a bit of a writing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
The functional part of it.
Mm-hmm. Because it's sort of like programming reality, programming, in other words, programming organization. That's really kind of the target here, is how people organize together. It's kind of a social thing up in the ether that it's hard to grasp onto, and yet we need a coherent model there so that people can work together well.
And by coherent model, we're referring to the same idea, like saying that caused mathematics to develop. And I'm not trying to say that we're on the same level as the people who say develop mathematics, or the people who say develop programming languages and all of that. But the idea is carrying on the notion where we need a new medium which can correspond between a lot of different layers,
Right.
and to have a way to capture something meaningful out of that.
Right. So you've called the APS language stack a medium, something to use. In other words, so to imprint symbols on, have it go up and down stacks, and have meaning at different levels and all that.
Right, from
A communication stack.
from lower technical levels.
Like if you're familiar with how the internet works, it's
Yeah.
a communication stack where the more significant application layer data gets encapsulated and encapsulated and packaged and packaged and packaged until at some point it's being sent along the wire.
You know what? We should have
between
made that.
routers.
We should have made that analogy a lot earlier, because it would have made a discussion between us
For the APS language stack.
a lot simpler.
To explain it to people, I think.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
we
even between you and
but
me.
between you and I, we both already internalized those types of models. So
But to make it explicit would have probably.
it helps the listener. So there you go, little gift.
Yeah.
Look
So-
up the OSI model.
OSI model is a great. Not to mention that the OSI model was one of the beginning phases of our development of the model.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it's proof that this form of modeling and communication works. That's how the internet works. So let's do organization that way too.
Do you remember?
Let's extend the internet up into the noosphere, whatever
We
they call
we
it.
actually have a diagram that is extremely old now, like hitting almost 10 years old, like in its inception. But do you remember from unit to nexus? There was a small diagram that
Yeah, that's the jumping from layer to layer.
that was literally me taking the OSI model's first 4 layers and renaming a few things. That's literally how that particular diagram came about. A copy of the OSI model with a twist. The connections making. So the twist being is that by the time you get to nexus, you get a unit.
Mm-hmm. Right, of course. And I have a feeling like that model also links up to something like just the general Hellenic model.
Oh yeah, the unit being the
Like-
archetype, but the nexus is not a single unit. It's units, and
Right.
in a recursive sense.
It's the simplest way of looking at something that's a form of stacking of meaning in which you have units, different types of units on a layer coming together to make a new unit at another layer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
As
how
simple as that,
you
yeah.
build all molecules, skin tissues. You can model them that way,
Yeah,
coherently,
isomorphically,
isomorphically.
and both coherently in the sense that it reflects reality, and isomorphic in two senses. That coherence to reflect reality itself, but at the same time to reflect each layer and the reality of layer building in and of itself. So it's not just a matter
Right.
of. So there's a double isomorphism. That's where it really gets interesting, I think.
Interesting. Yeah.
Indeed.
An isomorphism, like with the model itself at its core, and then with the
Perceived.
self being through perception.
And the scientific being through representation
Right.
out there. So like all of these kind of like a way a simplified sort of structure to say to be able to relay information about this, about that, and about that, and to actually point out the similarities between the way you can think about those things. Not that there is no differences, but then there are.
Sorry, I totally gapped out thinking about playing guitar because I'm holding a pick.
That's okay. It's not an important detail. It's just more of like me repeating the same thing.
Isomorphism. Mm-hmm. And so the Nexus model.
I'm gonna take your picks away.
No. But I will have a pen.
I'm doing the parent thing. You know, it's like, oh, this is what's distracting you.
You can't take my pen away.
This is what's distracting
You'll
you.
never
So
have
wait.
my pen. You'll
Let
never
me
have
fix
it.
that little
Never.
problem. Focus. So, yeah, we were talking earlier about trying to just talk about the language stack, but also get a little bit more into the system itself, and take a little twist here and not say that it's bad. Well, I mean, we do always say that, but we're gonna try. We're gonna try to give
no,
the
we don't
system
always
some kind
say
of.
it. We always try to delicately avoid, but never make explicit,
Yeah.
or hardly ever make explicit.
But
'cause
but,
it's,
but our tone is always like model is greater than system, right?
it's such a sticking point for when trying to communicate out to the public at large. You feel like, okay, you're fighting something. What is
Yeah.
the bad thing?
Yeah. So it always comes up like in that context that the system is bad, the model is good, model is better than the system, all of that kind of stuff. And what I want to try to do today is take that left turn and say, no. Actually, we need to bring system to the same level of importance as model, and not as the bad guy to fight against. It's the yin and the yang situation in which the two make the whole. It's not a situation where one is greater than the other or one can exist in any way without the other.
Right.
Like the notion that the two are distinct elements from each other is basically what we want to draw attention to, that they're not.
So we were gonna pull up what charts were we gonna maybe pull up?
Coherence.
One is definitely the degrees of coherence.
It could be beneficial to discuss order, chaos, and absurdity. Just the very first columns of our table for archetypes.
The primordial archetypes.
Yeah, like not getting into the 12 primordial archetypes, but like the underlying order, chaos, and absurdity that they're manifest from, if you want to say it that way.
Cool. Okay, just making some notes.
Mm-hmm. ABS.
APS.
Oh,
I mean.
absurdity.
Oh yeah, that's the one. Right. Yeah, I initialized.
ABS could be many
Brakes.
things.
Absolutely.
And we also have a real live example of a situation of coherence, which we can allude to.
Well,
that
just
is
in our
more-
own minds, but
Yeah.
we.
Well, it's
there's
just-
no
it's-
story to tell, really.
No, we're not. We're not going to try to tell a story there. We're going to try to see if.
We can think on that situation and try to
just a reflection.
process and
Just a reflection, but
Develop.
but in a generic sense, and not to pinpoint an individual out or anything like that. It was just I would say the individual was more like a catalyst for the thought I kind of want to express here.
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Rather than
Right.
rather
So we're
than
just kind of acknowledging
target
that,
them as an individual at all.
that while talking about adversarialism
Yeah, yeah,
as in a degree of hostility,
yeah.
that we do have a kind of case in mind which sparked this whole kind of, you could say, inspired us to speak about it.
Yeah.
So that's where we're coming at it from today. And it does seem to kind of dovetail into that APS language stack type of
Right.
layer. Because what are you making here? The idea is that you're expressing. Language is to be expressed on a medium, right?
Right.
Therefore, and you can't do that without systemic organization.
So if we were to look at this medium, we can look at a medium in terms of signal and noise, right? So a medium is something that vibrates on its own, and when you modulate that vibration, I'm talking metaphorically, of course.
Yep.
It's not. It doesn't have to be a vibration, but shifts from in space through time, right? Like at one point it's this, at another point it's that, and that sequence of changes is either a signal or or noise.
They call it a carrier on the medium too, right? That definition of what that is.
Yeah, it's all very basic stuff that's already been defined elsewhere in many different ways. I'm just piggybacking on the concept rather than trying to get all technical.
Right.
If
Just introducing, appreciate it.
yeah, if you need the technical definitions and stuff like that,
No, we do.
by all means,
We do need to
research.
Before we talk about a subject. We do need to kind of bounce across a number of other domains which we're trying to link together. So that makes sense. Why
Yeah.
you can go ahead and
So
articulate.
So the reason I mentioned noise to signal ratios in a medium is because this is that situation where you have order and chaos existing in the same space, making it what we call absurd. A medium on its own, without any kind of modulation, without any kind of grammar to control how signals can be combined to make sense of anything on a higher layer, is noise. And is by definition chaotic. And up until the point that you have a grammar, all you have is the chaotic element,
Right.
right? So
you're trying to show how we have make a big distinction out of the absurd is order and chaos, and then it breaks down into further things. But you're showing how the reason why that's introduced first on the left is because it permeates and is a part of everything. Both of them are part of
yeah, everything's
right?
built off of that concept.
Through the absurd, I guess you could say. But
right. So when you capture, say, uncertainty, you're given order, a language, to the carrier to describe the uncertainty, right? Like when you introduce that language into the medium, you're setting up a set of rules and grammars to say, okay, when your noise comes in this way, you interpret it that way, and it becomes signal.
Right, and it's interesting how the mere definition itself, the expression, the speaking of the order, implies that absurdity in it, which pulls in the chaos in some in a way of
you've taken that medium and arranged it into an ordered form.
But the fact that order is absurd as well, that means that there is chaos all along the edges.
Right, because it's also arbitrary in a sense.
That's what I mean. That's how it pulls both chaos and order
And
to any level.
And to point out the arbitrariness that I'm referring to, it's the fact that, for example, you can say the same thing in two different languages, right? So words are going to be used. In their own context, they are words, but to the other language, they are noise.
Right.
And so that's how you take that same chaos and order it this way, and order it that way, and order it this way, and the order is isomorphic across the next layer.
And so how do you make sure that languages you encounter can be converted from chaos into order?
And
that's through a learning process.
And that's the download upload situation that I keep referring to. That's where the blockers of upload are happening, because you've when you put something into
Now,
the chaos realm, if you will,
right.
getting the order back out of it takes energy. Right?
So
like
download
in
is a
sense.
given. Download is a given from the system because the
Because
system operates as an ordering thing, which orders that which is below it. That's what it does.
It's dissipating that
And
by
we're connected through our nervous system to this bunch of order, right?
Right. So as we're speaking, we're vibrating the air, for example. That So
Right.
into the
But
medium of
what
air,
I'm saying is
we're ordering air as our
we
chaotic
are,
medium.
and the order is always coming down. That's why we say it's a given. The download is a given. Download of order onto something, but the upload is not given. And this is the main key point between like isomorphism and dysmorphism, I guess, and the ability of membership, I guess, probably is got to be connected in there.
We could reference the car chart here to make that point very, very concretely. Because that, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you bring it up?
Yeah. Let me just write it down first.
Yeah, because in the car chart, what you're seeing is Agent 1 and Agent 2, right? And Agent 1 is trying to send a message across to Agent 2. But in order to do so, it has to download that message into a medium that both are on, say air.
Right. Yeah. I think that point is great, obvious. It seems like that. I mean that's the core, one of the core points of what we're talking about. This stacking of layers.
Well,
Model.
The car diagram also points out that there's two layers to the isomorphism. The one is it has to go isomorphically down, across, and up. That's one isomorphism that has to be maintained through the transition. The other one is the content of the message. So one is the structure of the message through the physical medium or whatever.
Right.
The other one is what the message is saying. So it also has to be isomorphic to the intent of the original agent. That's the kicker about it's that secondary isomorphism that's disconnected.
It doesn't have to be, but that's what's ideal.
Right, and that's where we get our dysmorphism, and that's where I go for the example of using bleach to clean out your
veins, like
your
injected.
your corona.
Right.
Right, like you drink bleach because it cleans. Right, like that physically on the isomorphic message, it makes sense. The language is making sense, but the outcome of that is dysmorphic to the agent upon which it is
So
enacted.
those are called vertical and horizontal isomorphisms.
Yeah, usually, at least in our speech.
Right.
I don't think we've termed these, but we could.
I think it's something like that. I'm sure we have. Vertical, horizontal. In the car chart, it makes perfect sense.
And so the upload problem happens in the horizontal isomorphism, not in the vertical one. The vertical one is another given. Because if you vibrate the medium a certain way, it's just going to do its thing. Right? Like, if you set something on fire, it's going to keep burning. If you talk to that fire, it's not going to stop burning. You know what I mean? Like...
Now, I wanted to bring up...
like, if you go through the layers below, that will work. But the layers above...
No, I get it. Like, if you do manage to express words, then you've done all you need to do for that to come back up the stack. That's the given.
Ideally, yeah.
Down is up. You're speaking to somebody who is raised in your culture with your language, right? What I wanted to talk about is the dysmorphism that can happen when you try to destroy another stack by sending a message down, right?
You don't even have to intend to destroy.
I know.
This is more like a skill thing.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to bring this back to the upload download thing, the systemic problem, the problem of the system crushing and running over people, including those who execute it. In that disconnection can happen, right? Where what you're downloading should be listening to what the upload is responding, how the upload responds to that download. This is an experiment on the world around you. You sense in what comes back from what you did in the past.
Well, right? That's more the feedback, observation, tracking.
Right.
To the core, really.
Yes.
Which is the skill that we keep referring to, and that skill is divided. Even though upload is the only problem, it's divided up into two agencies. So, on the one hand, on the sending side, you have to be cognitive of the other agents' upload routines, so to speak, right? on the receiving side, you have to be cognitive of the downloaders.
Right. So this may be like related to side channel, what I've talked about before. It's like it's supposed to be an established kind of carrier for this type of discussion.
So this is resolved in our machinations in terms of it installing the protocols, right? So when it comes to, like, say, engaging agent 1 engaging with agent 2 on the ontological matrix, the very first thing that needs to be established
Forgot
is
to share. So I did. Sorry, carry on.
the first thing that has to happen is that there has to be an establishment that the protocol on the receiving end is isomorphic with the sending end. So there has to be a meta communication going on about said protocol.
Right. And interestingly, you could have two, like, let's say, high-functioning humans just connect together from even different cultures completely, and somehow have a process whereby you're sensing and creating this communication
Right.
loop.
It's like, oh, you mean this by that, right? Like catching on to the underlying signals.
With like the highest intelligence, not just a
Which
territorial
re-
type
which
response.
really points to what's happening there is to achieve that sort of protocol. Another medium is utilized, a deeper medium, right? For example, instead of talking about objects as they are, right, it's going to become about how these objects are used. And then you can find similarities because most objects by human beings are used for the same purposes, but they're just different objects, right? Like, sorry, I don't have a better example, but toilet paper and bidet. You know, like you
Mine's always in the gutter, Virginia.
Of course it is, but that's because we're gross.
It elicits
We're disgusting.
it elicits a better response.
I do like the shock value. It perks up the ears for some reason.
Memorable.
But yeah, like you can look at the two devices like on their own and be like they have nothing to do with each other, right? But when it comes to like, oh, I use this for that, all of a sudden they're exactly the same thing,
Sure, yep.
just a different process. All the conversation goes from the objects, the nature of the object, to the nature of wiping one's ass. To put it mildly. So yeah, there's a deeper sort of abstraction out of which the materialized concrete things come from. And that abstraction tends to be far more universal than
Potentially, yep.
than the
It's always there.
than the
It's gotta
individual
be.
expressions.
And you're talking about like who we are deeper in our being, our ability to process reality and learn from reality.
Yeah, and we see this actually.
The mechanics of that.
We actually see this in the mundane every day, in the fact that we all use the same language to speak to each other. Right? Like that's the abstraction. English is the abstraction. All the words are the same to everybody, technically speaking, but everybody says different things using English. So at the core, there is something more fundamental and ubiquitous across the individual agencies that they tap into to send their messages across. And that universality, if it's not found on one layer, it has to go deeper. And if it's not found there, it has to go deeper.
Right.
And science is working essentially in the same fashion.
Correct. And this reminds me of our APS language stack, where you have those types of stack processors, where it's going up in a stack and then it can just teleport, like once it's found something, to
Yeah.
a totally different area of the stack.
Or even more concretely, that's the subject stack. More concretely on that, you can have a situation in which every subject and every aspect is literally transformed into another type of an object, and actually the only way that it actually executes is so a lot of it is there's the way it's written, and then there's the way it's going to get rewritten.
Right.
to become more basic.
Pardon.
So the most basic you can get in the computing sense is all the way down to procedures and all the way down to your binary code, right? Like your assembly stuff. Jump, literally jump to this position in RAM, read that instruction, execute that instruction, which will tell you what the next instruction is, and so on and so forth. It's rarely it has to break down to like really concrete stepping stones, right? Didn't like what the real
Chorus,
process is
causal.
on that layer. So as we're breaking down from the more sophisticated layers to the more basic layers, subjects and aspects disappear into types. Because underneath it all you really need to do is create an object in the universe of a specific type that in that context does this. And if you have a different context, well, you just create a different type for that, and so on and so forth. Like you just reuse that basic.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying.
That basic structure to
That's how
represent.
contexts are built. And we went through the language stacks too. This
Yeah.
is what you're referring to. How simpler components can come together to make more
Right.
complex
So
components.
by the time you have an actual subject, you're just telling the system, you're going to create all of these different objects on the fly based on these parameters to compensate for the information that this context needs, that context needs, that context needs. Right? Like the context will assume it's going to come in from lower layers. So-
It must.
And the way you express
That's what
it.
context is it not?
And then there's the disconnection, like aspects and subjects in this language. Well, they can all be represented by types and objects. Context will assume. So it's
Sorry, just
six.
checking.
It's basically 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. However, most languages today are at that basic level and don't allow for that kind of abstraction.
Yeah, that's crazy. Because it's too powerful, man. That's what it's all about.
It's harder to
Comments
follow.
Are not supported
And
on
that's by
private.
design.
Oh shit! Now they set this one to private because the last one I set to private. I see. Okay.
I'll be right back then.
Yeah, I guess we'll take a short break.
Very short.
Very short. And be right back. Okay, alright.
So
Alright, say it. Spit it out.
I just understood why I was that point was why what I was pushing on, where you can convert subjects and aspects back into types and objects in the concrete sense, and why there's a problem with upload, and how this is all connected. So the basic problem, the way I see it, is that because we don't have a language to capture the protocol of how to convert an object, a subject and an aspect back into its constituents, objects, and types, what we get is, the first part of the problem is that our language uses subjects
Right.
naturally,
Yeah.
but
So
but doesn't have the protocol
when we
to convert.
when we download, we're bumbling because we don't know how to connect our thoughts right back down to reality as we express it.
And so when you transfer a subjective piece over to the next agency, the protocol might not even be there to connect it the same way that you used. And so there, in that disagreement in the protocol is what you could call the lack of understanding between people, despite the fact that they're saying the same things in the same language.
Too
Right.
bad Chad is dead. I mean, on YouTube, it's not working. Let me test it from here.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like that.
Oh yeah.
So the importance, I guess, of this language isn't the programming part. It's in the understanding element of subjects and aspects, and bringing that into the constituents of the dream, which will allow which will allow
in
us
the
to
moment
glean,
to unpack,
which allows us to glean the different peaks,
to
if you
unpack
will.
the system in the moment while you download
And-
using it.
And so from there, you can actually understand subjectivity peaks and the teleportation, so to speak, that occurs when misunderstandings happen. Because that subjective language allows you to navigate.
So it sounds like you're talking about like kind of ideological warfare happening very often, and being able to break that down into actual, like, where is the source of our thoughts?
Well,
together.
Okay, well, that's kind of way out there, but the source of our thoughts is not a sudden statement I understand personally.
No.
But the source of the disconnection of the upload. Because the download is a given. You've chosen your subject, you just send shit through it, right? But when you're choosing your subject back out of the chaotic mix of possibility to interpret what has
So
been said.
that's one more step then on top of seeing
Yeah.
the unpacking.
And so that's where skill has to be important. Like, that's the point. But that skill is, again, two-faced. The sender has to install said protocol in the receiver. That's on them. And the receiver has to be able to receive the protocol, and that's on them. So one problem, two sides.
So yeah.
So there's two solutions to it. So, like, it has to be solved here and there to be resolved entirely. And without that, and this is the tall order again, you can't tell people what to do, right? Like, you can't say you have to install protocol. You can suggest, but not say.
This to me sounds like the only person who would engage in learning about this is a member on their way towards mastery, and the mastery is that ability potentially to install and speak protocol in their language that they would understand.
I would add that the only person that would do it knowingly would be a member, but a guest, for example, could do it without knowing anything, because it's not about the knowing the protocol explicitly.
But why would they want
to? Sorry about that, but you can have bits and pieces
You
of
gotta
the.
put your thumb over that.
Oh,
That's what kills the sound.
cool!
Future.
I learned.
Future reference.
So, like, for a guest or a participant, it's not about having the protocol explicitly in their mind, right? It's just like they have an isomorphic protocol to begin with that already jives, and they don't know. There's no unifying context to it, but bits and pieces of it are already there.
I mean, I mean, like, maybe I'm saying, like, the only person who would use this or think to want to use it would be a member. Like, the idea of sending an upload protocol so that what gets downloaded can be recuperated.
You mean explicitly?
Yeah.
That would be a master. A member would be more on the receiving side. So
And that's what I said in the first place.
It's
as
the right
a mastery thing.
It's the right hand side agent, whereas the master is the left hand side agent. So in the perfect isomorphic interaction, you have a member guest kind of thing going, right? But master guest,
right?
And and the guest is made member by master, if you will, by skillful protocol manipulation thing.
Right.
That's why it's
so
mastery.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you go to a guest and try to use this protocol with them, let's say they don't know what you're talking about, but they try it anyways. They start using it, and then something clicks and makes sense about it.
That provokes
this
membership.
Is provoking membership, right?
So
that's what I meant. That member would be only one interested in it, aside from casually. Like,
yeah, you're actually giving me a really cool idea for a narrative to go along with our quote unquote card chart, in that what's happening in the chart, if you look at that as in the most isomorphic sense of what's supposed to happen, like that process, the agent on the left is your master.
Right.
The dream of this begins with a participant sitting on the right hand side as the agency, and the full circle and conclusion is that the download and upload cycle is the stack is made member. So you start with participant and you make a coherent statement, and then the next cycle you got member on the other side.
I like that this chart can be used to describe the process of increase of coherence, the journey of increase in coherence.
Yeah, domains of progress. To be more, that's what that cycle would include. The domains of progress.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that's what the domains of progress are there for, to illustrate that particular interaction. So you participate. Mastery is the ability to provide that same information in a unified way so that the participation becomes membership.
We don't have domains of progress in
chart form. No, it's only sitting there undefined in the glossary. There we go. Awareness, accountability, discipline, insight. So
for each degree of coherence, you're saying this cycle would
right. So I started
progress.
I started with saying, like, the member would have a piece of the protocol, perhaps expressed in a very different language. So say Christianity or Buddhism or atheism or whatever.
Scientism.
No. Well,
we're gonna throw everything in there.
All right. Scientism is the closer one to the religious element.
Right.
Of it.
Of the atheist.
Yeah.
In other words, a process like, in theory, I believe in doing an experiment and seeing what the results are.
I'm trying to talk about different identities that people go with, and to say that the protocol exists in one shape or another. Like, for example, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like the golden rule, it exists in one shape or form in every single identity that you can think of.
So can't we kind of establish religion off the pedestal a little bit and just say that all cultures have certain morals, and those may contain certain tidbits that you can use?
So higher layer, we have mythology. Lower layer, we have protocols pertaining to said mythology,
like commandments.
So if you're an atheist, on the hand, you have your science and you have your golden rule derived from.
You've got your professionals
Right, like the myth, the narrative, overarching narrative
And
of
the
everything.
golden rule.
And
Who-
then
who
and
else
then
has
your
the
sound
golden
bites
rule?
that fit into it, right? Like the individual sound bites. Those are where the protocols are found. So
Do people really follow the golden rule though?
that's besides the point. I'm talking about transformations of meaning, not what individual actions.
Yeah, I know.
So every you can think of every identity having their own overarching mythology of what reality is, and each containing sound bites to represent that. Talk about this, talk about that, talk about the other thing. In each of those different realities, you find a sound bite that can be the same. That can be thought of as the same protocol, expressed in different languages.
Yeah, there's some isomorphism.
And that the golden rule being one of them, which is easy to pick on because everybody knows what the fuck I'm talking about. Hopefully.
Every atheist out there knows what the golden rule is. This
Yeah.
is like all we ask of you, atheists. You don't have to believe in God. Just treat
Yeah, but
others as you
it's
treat
just-
yourself.
Right, like that's everybody knows this. So, yeah, the larger point being is that you can hone in on the protocol, and the master will be able to hone in the participants' protocol in their own language.
Right, speak their language.
That is the contextual mountain being done masterfully, skillfully, and with discipline and awareness and everything to do with
Now-
the domains of progress is encapsulated in
Just
that.
a nitpick, I guess, but this would be within the same temperament, typically. That would be able to be fluid. And if we are to jump across temperament, then
So
we're
it-
talking Grand Mastery.
Yes, so Grandmastery is that on steroids, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, the
Like wildly different
Gra-
ways of perceiving reality
However,
between those types of,
not
of
to get
cognition.
but to not get too much into the weeds of that, Grandmastery is still mastery. It doesn't take
Has to be, yeah.
it doesn't take away from the mastery part. So
Yeah.
if a grandmaster is enacting in a specific temperament, there's simply a master in that temperament,
Right.
right? Like it's not like a
Exactly.
title.
Yeah.
That
No,
you,
no.
That you need to. It's not a
The only
prestige.
thing you see is it looks like any other master.
Right,
Ideally.
which is why it's a nebulous title to begin with.
Right.
The grandmaster is not something that's seen. It's an archetype.
Although you could observe, it could be observed.
Archetypically, yes. Examples of. It appeared here. It appeared there. Here.
But I mean, if
This
if
person
you,
did grandmastery over here. This person did over there. But as a grandmaster, like Buddha, thing, it's a story. It exists in narrative. It doesn't.
I think so. There's a type of master who would not be able to tell, who would let's say see witness another master bringing somebody into membership, but then they may witness that same master bring somebody else into membership, but they have no idea what just happened. They seem like talking in a completely different way. It's alien, but yet this person came into membership and they don't know how or why. Like
Right.
that's beyond their type of mastery.
Well, that speaks to actually the difference between members and masters. A master would be able to see that somebody else was brought into membership through a
That's-
method they didn't understand,
That's what I
whereas a member would not see them being brought into membership at all. They wouldn't be able to make the distinction because they didn't hear it the same way. And so to them,
if it was a
process-
different temperament, you mean?
yeah, like that
Right.
process
If
would
it was
not,
the same temperament, you would think like yes,
so a
the
member would not be-
recognize the
a
member.
Yeah, this particular member would not be able to, not necessarily, but would not be able to recognize the step up into membership from the other person being brought up by the other master.
Typically, and you would get intuitional type stuff.
And to use Buddhism as an example, you see this a lot between as discrepancies between the schools, where you have lay people laying into each other for taking the Dharma in the wrong way. or
Right.
something like that, right?
Mhm.
Meanwhile, Buddhism as a whole
That's
all
expected,
acknowledges all of these perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So membership has that difficulty in recognizing temperaments, whereas mastery is not just. I guess this just comes to me now. Mastery wouldn't be only with regard to your own temperament, but at the very least, the recognition of that there are other temperaments and that they can
You have to have the
arrive
awareness
there.
to the upper level. That's what latches you into Grand Master.
Yeah, like you have to be able to at least recognize that it's part of the same thing, even if you don't understand the
Mhm.
specifics of the
Right.
protocol.
So the master wouldn't be so baffled. They're like, "What's going on here? What's going
Right.
on here?"
Which is why you got the Dalai Lama being one way, like a very specific Tibetan version of Buddhism, and I'm not talking about any
Mm.
of the controversy, which is
Aside from that, but
yeah,
the
a-
late the Vajrayana.
Vajrayana
Tibetan
is so different than Theravada in terms of its
execution, appearance.
appearance. But if you go
It's
deep,
psychedelic in appearance.
but when you go deeper into Theravada, actually, you start to see things like Tantra practices. They've been incorporated.
Right.
They-
And it has to be, and every temperament must contain the others. They're not so
Mm.
far disconnected.
It's just not the most prominent face of it, if you will.
Mhm.
Like Tantra in Theravada is a very different looking thing, and it happens in a very different context than it does in Vajrayana, which is itself also set apart from Theravada through Mahayana.
Mhm.
Like there, all three latter schools of Buddhism are Mahayana, the ones that we care about anyway. So, Chan or Zen, Pure Land, and Vajrayana, which we base our pragmatic, devotional and perceptional on, they're all Mahayana.
Perceptive.
They're leaving the where normally in our model the perceptive is the odd one out. The way this is set up is that the academic
Sure.
is the odd one out,
To me, the main
and for most people,
main
the
kinda-
academic will be.
the main distinction or the main leap to me is like a leap into dream. So like the Theravada kind of to me is more momental, like what is exactly happening to me right now in cognition.
Yeah, it's very down
Whereas
to earth.
the other schools are
Ish.
we've already now we've established that. Now here's within the
Yeah.
dream these things happen.
Yeah, it's very much like that, and this is also why you and I have our particular differences in terms of how we speak to people. You relate to more people than I do because you're on the Mahayana, so to speak, side, dream
Mhm.
side, and
Dream
so
comes easy to me.
So you're all speaking dream, and I'm here talking moment,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the difference, and
Like
that's
for
why.
me, it's like protocols. Let's dig some dirt. Let's do
Mhm.
something. Construct. Let's build. Let's do and learn. And,
And
for
I'm
you,
not-
it's like, well, look, interesting.
Okay, well,
how
this
a
one
person,
connects to that one.
Did you notice how he's learning when he goes along and does this process? What's happening inside his head?
Yeah.
He's executing a protocol.
But separating the two is a grave mistake.
Right.
And we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
and we can even denote that with the fact that would lack mastery. That would be membership only. And since we have all the way to grand mastery, that's not a case we can actually go for.
Hmm.
The model is basically saying
Pardon.
the model is basically saying there's more to it.
So to me, how I read that is kind of like the usual way would be devotional in, but devotional is really typically heavily dream based, kind of in the story of it, and you need to shift things to take apart that the reality, like the abstract reality that allows this dream to exist. That abstract reality itself must be taken apart, and that's how we shift the window, the cognitive window.
We have that captured in the eye diagram.
Who sees who?
Who sees who? Yeah.
Do we even have that?
Yeah, I think we do.
It's like such an old diagram. Yeah, you're right. It is here.
And the reason the eye
Wait.
diagram is capturing that, to put it bluntly, is if you are on the where most are devotional, if you're on that sort of track, so by that we mean you're looking for a role model to exemplify the very narrative that is being discussed. And so by copying said role model, you're devoted to them, obviously. And that's how you express model. But what's interesting about the devotional side is that it almost universally lands itself in the pragmatic. And real world example of that is how Pure Land practitioners in a more advanced, so to speak, journey, in their more advanced journey, begin to not see, so in a way, the distinctions between Zen and Pure Land. Like the practices of both become merged into a single unified practice, and that is a very recurrent element of Pure Land. If there's a
Sorry.
great book.
Gapped. Looking for my pictures. Here we go. Pardon me, the eye chart is arriving on its time. Continue. My apologies.
Well,
I drifted off. I got on task.
The gist of what I said is that if you start off devotional,
Yeah.
which is like the case for most people, to follow a role model,
Yeah. But there's a typical path
there's
that you
a
may move towards.
there's a transition that happens in which the distinction between the pragmatic and the devotional start to disappear, which is exemplified in this diagram by being a much more tighter loop than the outer edges. The outer edges are spread more wide and are more, so to speak, obscure because of that. But the circle between devotional and pragmatic is very tight, right?
Just checking if we're still online even. It says we're online. Sorry, all kinds of distractiminations going on here.
Alright, well, you solved that. I'm gonna go deal with my distractions.
Me too. And with that, we'll be right back. We is back.
So yeah, I don't
Plus
want
images.
I don't want to like take
Minus confusion.
I don't want to take like a lot of time on this tangent actually, but the real point of this
It's great to discuss temperaments, though, like we've been doing. We need to
Pushing-
get into coherence now,
Yeah.
and back to the main narrative.
So the real push, for this diagram was about how in the inner pragmatic and devotional I guess circle, you can call it. We have a tighter coupling.
Mm-hmm.
Like what you can see from this diagram is that the outer two temperaments, the academic and the perceptual, have a wider, sort of broader swaths of everything, whereas the inner two only really refer back to each other, and that's not itself like presented accidentally. I mean, it is something that emerged as a visual representation of something we've already seen. And what I was pointing to is that historically speaking, we have this exact same phenomena happening between Zen and Pure Land. So it's not just a matter
Right.
of this diagram showing us
This
something.
idea that like the two temperaments in the center, which are most tightly bound, you could say, to dream, to construct of reality itself and the ongoing spectacle.
That's not necessarily true, because dream is down, pragmatic is up. The Zen pragmatic side is more like, whatever the dream is, what's the next action? Right? Like, yes, there is like a sort of like underlying core
Yeah.
faith in,
But think
in
about
a particular.
it, like what devotional could do anything without pragmatic? In
Well,
a sense.
that's why they're so tightly bound. It's like every time you have a devotional sense, you're being
You-
pragmatic.
you
Every
must
time you're being
have
pragmatic,
a-
you're being devotional.
You must have a sense of reality.
Right.
That's what the pragmatic in its most abstract
In-
sense is about.
The difference between the pragmatic is that the pragmatic is protocol focused. Don't give me the role model. Tell me what the protocols are of that role model, so to speak. Like, break it down into like, breathe in, breathe out. Don't tell me this huge story about the cosmological, whatever.
Yeah, some dude who was great.
Right. On the other hand, you have some dude who is great, therefore you want to do all of these things. And so you have two different approaches.
Right. And the dude who is great did things through meticulous, in a way, sort of behavioral structure.
Right. Which only leads back to pragmatism. Right? Like, the only way to follow that.
Right.
that
That's what I
that
meant by
situation.
tightly bound into a dream together, the two in the center.
Right.
Whereas a perceptive, it's spelt wrong here, takes that and extends it back.
Oh, we changed it since
Yes.
that was.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's such an old drawing. There's a lot that's old on here.
This is also almost a decade old now.
Neurochemical OS. But yeah, they're bound in the middle like that, and the perceptive is the one that incorporates those two plus the academic in the psychedelic manner of.
Yeah, yeah. That's what people normally associate with shamanism and that kind of stuff.
Right, like just total top-down stack connection.
So yeah, there's that, but that's not really the major point. It's more like a segue to, not a segue even, a side point to the fact that why there's temperaments to begin with.
We didn't even get into why there are temperaments.
Or that there are temperaments, sorry.
Yeah.
You're right.
Never mind that. That's another time.
We're just getting into the, well, we did touch on the why, and that has a following. It piggybacks on the fact that it's not just our discovery here. There's also a historical
Right.
arc
Yeah. Right.
with specifically
So
Buddhism.
why
but
of the temperaments? Sort of, we appealed to authority a bit here.
history, if you want to
History.
call it. We appeal to a representation, or an archetype, or we are devoted to. This is our expression of devotional in a different way. mine from the academic perspective, yours from the pragmatic perspective,
Mhm.
that appeal is strictly
Right.
speaking
And
devotional.
It's just a model. It's a model that works, that we've continually developed because it works, because we've been constantly reminded that it's working.
And another expression of our devotion, right? Like that's if the devotional element had been
Right.
explicitly missing from the
i.e.
way we
concrete.
approach it, that's where our devotion is implicitly expressed.
Right.
Because otherwise, why would we still be talking model after all these years?
Hmm.
I mean, must be something in there,
Indeed, indeed.
and it might be just purely dopamine, but
No, it's
but
not.
the fact that it resonates with other people
But-
tells
but
me otherwise. Yeah.
Not just dopamine, but dopamine, I guess you would say, is an indicator of something.
It's a reward. Back to the discussion of the system not being too bad.
And then is the reward isomorphic?
Context dependent. So reward implies narrative. Like immediate.
Reward also implies bodily function of secreting some kind of chemical. And is
no,
that
no,
action
no.
isomorphic?
No, pleasure implies that. So pleasure is much.
Feel free to Buddhist explain.
Well, reward and punishment are part of a narrative.
I'm just kidding. You're the best for that kind of
you're
stuff.
rewarded for something. You're punished for something. It's part of an arc of an ongoing story.
Mm-hmm.
Pleasure and pain are in the moment.
So
It's
for
what
me
you're
to
feeling.
for me to say a bodily chemical action, that it still is in question, but it really the argument has to be shunted up many layers.
So you know
to
how
make
I
any
tend to
sense.
shock? Some people take pain, which is felt in the moment, as a reward, which is strictly part of their narrative.
Mm-hmm.
If you need any further example of that, I would suggest taking a look at the BDSM community.
Right. So
Like it
anyways,
exists.
I think I went. I must have went down in the layers too far because you brought up reward and punishment, which is a social kind of the market.
Yeah.
So social
Transactions. Both rewards and punishments are forms of transactions.
through the ego.
Well, the ego is defined by being a transactional version of self. So whatever self is presented for transaction, in other words, whoring itself out,
Mm-hmm.
you have market. So yes, prostitution
Right.
is the oldest profession, and it is the only real profession out there.
Profession linked to ego. Worship of the professionals as our mythological, well, they were certified, so they're going to do the perfect job on my teeth or whatever.
If you'd like to know what the reaction is to prostitution is in society is based on, it's this fear of being recognized exactly as one, and that insecurity drives people who do it explicitly into being
Isn't there
shunned.
that imposter syndrome, which may or may not be linked to this sort of idea, that we feel like that what the ego and its certification and its
it's all fake?
education process is all sort of fakery.
Mm-hmm.
Then that kind of leaves you vulnerable if you can see it for what it is.
It makes you
Most
vulnerable
people
because,
would
if you make a mistake, even though you had a great track
if you're binding and identifying tightly to this ego, such questions could not happen. So isn't maybe imposter syndrome like a sign of health, mental health potentially?
Of course it is. It's called intrusive thoughts. Of course it is.
Is that a broader category of thing or what?
Intrusive thoughts? Yes. Intrusive thoughts are
Do they come from
responsible.
the ego, or is this more like, could we talk like schizophrenic type of things?
You
that,
have to have a thought. It has to be
but
from
all
narrative.
thoughts are intrusive in a sense.
But they're also connected to narrative. So if the narrative is not one you would want to even hold, for example,
Right.
all black people are criminals.
Market ego.
So I'll admit it right now.
That's
on
market
record.
ego speak, though.
I
isn't
grew
it?
up in Eastern Europe, and in Eastern Europe, I didn't stay there long enough for it to like take this kind of hold on me. But in Eastern Europe, the world is very much divided up into very specific regions. Africa is poor. It's where the people have flies on their face, and there's nothing
Right.
else there. Asian people are weird and set in their own ways, and they're backwards. You have all of these different
Yeah.
categories and categories.
To just paint over an entire
And so now I find myself
Other.
at 40 years old
re-examining
having-
and feeling those come up from your past.
there's intrusive thoughts that keep like repeating those things I've heard and overheard, and like the cartoons
Right. Isn't this interesting how your innocence can be taken from you just by hearing a rude joke or an association with a certain race of people?
Yeah.
And every time you hear that, that comes up from your past, even though wasn't your thought. Someone said it. It like passed on to you.
Yeah, and so I find myself saying like no to myself, right? And I'm like, I don't even think these things to begin with.
This is the process of a normal thought, though, I think. And probably any time that comes up, like this is a kind of a weird thing. Is there maybe like a trauma release processes
this is trauma.
that can happen? Of course, but
This is
the
traumatizing
release
to the root, to the
of-
core.
And I think this is a big field right now because a lot of people want to help to let go of the past and all that.
And so let's backtrack to problems with upload. When you have intrusive database of thoughts constantly interfering with your upload, like, and you're not skillful, let's say you're in the boonies and you've never been taught to pay attention to any of this.
Right. So by interfering with upload, you're meaning a summarizing of reality, using a term
Yes,
to,
yeah.
to whitewash over something or whatever.
Yeah, so like at this point I can say like there's a database of say racism, sexism going on in my head from shit I've heard over the years and also
Right.
repeated for not knowing any better.
And these are the things we've encountered in our
And now-
life, in our past, and we shouldn't be ashamed
And
of it.
it's not that I'm ashamed of it. It's just there's an awkward feeling of
But-
I have something written down in there that doesn't feel like a part of
I
it.
bet a lot of people
And
feel
so it's
ashamed
very
of it.
intrusive.
Feel ashamed instead of knowing what to do and how to process it. Just
But when you
contain
feel,
a shame.
but if you
about
just feel shame and you don't process it, what do you normally respond with? Frustration and anger
it. Yeah.
over
I'm
any
just saying,
other
most,
little
most
thing.
people are probably doing that, if anything.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you. I think I'm just more excited. But yeah, like having an entire fucking database in your head constantly hammering weird statements at you.
Everything
that
from
you
your
that you
past.
yourself
So
have to like go back and like, no, I
So-
do not actually think that.
let's break this down like cognitively. You're typically encountering an object through your senses, which you're identifying through whatever number
Protocols.
of all things together protocol. You're identifying that object, and then that's triggering this database of every time in the past that object has come up. Now you're
It's
going,
associated with it.
you're
Yeah.
boom, your whole history of your entire life, potentially all things, and the most prominent kind of somehow get welled up to the top, but they all trigger.
And then you have this whole narrative that you have to decompose and say, yes, I believe that. No, I don't believe that.
Right.
Yes, I believe that. No, I don't believe that
You-
at all.
For each object, there's an ongoing
And then it
process
and then it comes,
of management.
but then it comes up again and again.
This is the
and again.
management process of each object we have to take. That's a responsibility, right?
Mhm.
Isn't this a way of healing, I guess, is to maybe understand that it's not our fault, but yes, we have to kind of go through these processes, responses to that soundbite. A soundbite comes in, you're like in your head thinking, okay, respond to it. But after a while, after you've played out these theaters, don't you end up summing that up into a soundbite itself and saying, yes, we've been here
Not if you're
100 times now.
If you're not paying attention, yeah, you do that. But if you're
100
not,
times now.
you should.
Isn't this is what you want to do, isn't it? To say I've to be able to reconcile past experience.
So you're talking about chunking again, right?
Yeah.
The thing about the talk about nirvana is that you're paying so much attention. Nirvana is more like a verb, and in that sort of framework,
Right.
you're more paying attention to the happenings of this happening So your past karma is not denied, so to speak. So it's always going to feed back into it. Your memories are always going to feed back into it. So you can't get rid of the database and erase it or something.
Right.
But at the same time, that the literal refusal to chunk it again, and constantly only ever seeing it as the bits and pieces,
The fraction, the shrapnel of what it was.
is the way forward, and the way to not redo the same mistakes, because the mistakes were made by the chunking to begin with. So I'm going to allude to an experiment that they've done to a monk in meditation, just to see if there's any differences in
So
brain
is it a
activity.
coping mechanism then to
Skill,
chunk further?
Maturation.
It sounds like
yes,
what you're saying.
I misheard.
To chunk further.
I was assuming something else.
Like you're talking about dissipating the chunking itself, maybe, or
Yeah, like recognizing that the higher layer is just
yeah,
in the medium of the lower.
So when these moments come up, you see some object that brings up a bunch of stuff. Instead of trying to reconcile and understand that whole thing further, just see it for what it is, and
a very prevalent
dismantle it in
statement.
the moment.
A very prevalent statement again in places like Buddhism, just like see reality as it is, right? Like that's what they're alluding to, really.
Yeah.
But we have to be cognizant that Buddhism was invented in a context where computers did not exist, so the way they talked about it is different.
A lot of stuff is coping mechanisms, except for that which we share in our sort of universality of experience with each other.
Well,
That's what
really
needs to be realized in no matter what has happened in our lives, it has to be broken down in those terms.
That's what's being coped with. Right? And then there's this coping mechanism, that coping mechanism, different myths to surround it.
So that kind of turns like the whole trauma book trauma book circuit, authors about releasing trauma, into like a seemingly impossible thing, because we're talking membership here. We're talking the ultimate trauma book that we're writing right now.
Yeah, and we're not like this is clearly not really a self-help book in any sense because of that. Because ultimately speaking, we can't sit here and install different protocols for you to take that moment in, all of that narrative of reward and punishment, and translate it for you into moments of pleasure and pain.
I wanted this book to be a tool usable by, let's say, a facilitator, a guild facilitator.
Of course. But I think the book is one of many tools. The dashboard, for example, has to be another.
100%. That's a kind of online communication medium. That's bringing the medium to life.
And the book will set the stage for what the fuck you do with the dashboard. Because the dashboard is literally... do you remember the flat diagram, the pumpkin one?
For one, it seems so
open.
open.
Ego stack?
Right.
So in the ego stack, the dashboard is very, very clear. What you're doing is you're interacting with the system. Hence, the system. One of the topics I wanted to mention is that the system is not like inherently something bad. It's a feedback system. Its feedback is reward and punishment. What it refers to.
It's very simple. The ego stack.
What it refers to simply is survival. It is not about an authoritative structure to begin with. That's more like what you can do with it. Right, like the way it can run away from itself.
Yep.
I think the pumpkin diagram also has reward and punishment.
There it is. All right, here's the pumpkin.
Yes, we do have reward and punishment, and that flows from the entropy of the whole. So it's not a neglect of reward and punishment in any sense. It appears in this very much resolved diagram.
This reminds me of talking about the biological sensation of pain as a mechanism at some layer is just happening from below.
Right, your nervous system is doing shit. You can't control it. You're getting a message.
I interestingly touched something hot recently, even though you're not supposed to. And on the tips of my finger, like nothing ended up happening. They're completely normal. But after that, I grabbed like a cool pack right away, put it on that. But for like the next 2-3 hours, it was like on fire. Like the outer pad of my finger felt like it was on fire, and it was unbearable unless I put it on something cool. And so, then it was gone, fine. Like don't feel anything.
So that's just a nerve firing,
and it's such a cool.
And like, that nerve was firing. That nerve was firing because when you burst your cells,
damaged some bunch of stuff,
and the juices wash over the nerve, it knows to send that signal. And so no matter what you're doing with the and the cooling thing is basically another signal saying cancel. Right? It's not fixing the damage. It's not doing any of that. The cooling also prevented further damage, but that's a different picture. It also sent a cancel signal, which is why.
But apparently you don't want to cool it like too fast, too cold, because that can cause some shit.
Frostbite. If you
get more damage, I guess.
If you freeze,
which I thought was weird because this ice pack was like covered in plastic and it didn't feel even cold almost. But if you're touching it, it's like barely cool, right? And it like perfectly was enough to cool to stop.
It's removing energy. It's enough to remove the energy.
Yeah.
It's funny. Like you can actually eat hot peppers and mint, and you won't cancel the heat of the peppers with the cooling of the mint, because those two.
It seems different to me.
It's different in the sense because they're actually activating. The one is activating your actual burn sensation,
like hot
and the
cool
other one is activating your cool sensation, but they're not the same thing.
It feels like hot and cold is used as a metaphor to some extent for that sensation. It's not literally hot or literally cold.
Cool normally removes heat, and heat normally removes.
But if you take like a temperature gun to the mouth while you're eating chili peppers, it's not hotter.
No, because it's entirely restricted to the nervous system.
That's what I'm saying.
So
if you have a cool mint and you take the temperature gun, it's still the same temperature.
Right.
It's a metaphor for how it tastes.
What's happening is that you have two different registers
totally
for hot and
different things
cold.
happening.
Your body has two different registration systems for hot and for cold, so you can feel hot and cold at the same time. That's what it's talking about.
I just wonder how like connected that is to the actual hot cold nerve sensation.
You have a specific nervous system for cold, and a specific
like, do you
one
think chili
for
peppers
hot.
actually feel like burning, like taking a lighter?
They activate the exact
the
same nerves
okay.
that repeat hot message to the brain.
Interesting.
They don't heat anything up. They simply touch the nerve some way, in some sense.
Feels like you're burning alive.
In some, and then we use that pain as
a
reward.
Why
mechanism.
do we like it? I fucking love that.
Again,
shit, man.
it's like it's your BDSM situation right all over again.
Yeah, there we go.
Sadomasochism, man. This would be masochism.
It's so interesting that it's not really pain.
No, the sensation is pain. The narrative is that it's reward.
Right.
That's the discrepancy, and that's how you can talk about the discrepancy in the upload. That's the upload right there. You're reading pain as reward. You're reading pleasure as punishment. For example, the people that
but that doesn't make it a
are
bad
very
thing,
modest.
or it doesn't make it a problem, because it's possible that the capsaicin and all that can be healthy to your cardiovascular.
Inherently it's not a problem.
And like looking from an upper kind of higher level, that the human knows this is actually healthy.
Inherently it's not a problem, it's a vulnerability. And the problem is taking advantage of that vulnerability.
Right.
Charlatanism is taking advantage of exactly that vulnerability. It presents situations of pain as
so this
your
is the
reward.
point of saying that story.
Mm-hmm.
the hot sauce is actually pain felt as reward. It shows that there can be a complete disconnect between what's happening below. Your body is telling you, "Oh, this hurts."
Mm-hmm.
Yet
But the story you're telling
above,
yourself, you're
in
like,
your
oh,
head,
this is great.
in your mind.
Or like
Right.
thrill seeking, like when you're like flying through the air
This
with
makes
like
me think about-
on the flimsy equipment
This makes me think
through
about
mountainous areas.
worse than that and more prevalent drugs,
Mhm.
which destroy your body.
Well, those are easier. Those are easier to acquire. Like thrill seeking is harder to acquire than drugs. It's a matter. This is market. The, you. That's the problem, and the market takes advantage of it, and you see gradients of it. The easier it is to do nothing to get the thrill, the more you'll have people doing it, and then you'll have the next layer, the thrill seekers, the submarine divers,
Sure,
and all
yeah,
of that
yeah.
stuff.
The
I
Titanicers.
had to throw that in there.
Shame on them, those
Like-
filthy billionaires.
Assuming the entire story is quote unquote true, which is up for grabs. Maybe they were on the Epstein list. Who knows?
Are you getting conspiratorial now?
Oh, look at me. No, I believe always that the simpler explanation is often the truth, and I do think that the equipment was shit.
They wanted to be famous for being a person who have looked at the Titanic wreck. There's like a list on the Wikipedia
and
of people who have had their eyeballs on it.
and then
So it's going to be all through history and time.
and
they'll
then
be
combine
famous.
it with all the shortcuts that are taken to save costs, and then you have what you have. That's personally my opinion of it, but look at this way. That kind of risk was seen as reward, despite the fact that this tiniest minute failure is catastrophic pain and
No.
and cessation of existence, which is to most people's narratives is pain, right? Like dying is something people quote unquote are afraid of.
You got to know that you're basically dead walking into something like that.
I don't think
Although
they
they
did.
probably didn't, but
I don't think they're that connected to reality. They can't be. They think that technology solves shit.
but I bet you the majority of them maybe did think that way right before they died. When you hear the,
Oh no,
the hull
that
creaking,
it dawned on them just then.
right?
Just then.
When it's like one
When it
part
was
starts buckling in and then probably wouldn't even be that much.
Well, no. Once the water starts coming in, you do feel something for a split second. You're still there until it just
Yeah.
crushes you. I would imagine.
There will be
I'm not an
no,
ex- I'm not an
There'll be
expert.
no further thought on the matter as far as when that implosion happens.
Do I doubt that they had a realization right at that second? No, I don't doubt it. All of that
The
money,
thing is, I think
everything they've had,
it
meant
could have
fuck
happened.
all.
It could have happened so much faster than we imagine,
Mm.
without any sign. That's what I kind of think. That's like if like because they would have pressed the emergency button and started coming back up. That like would have. I bet there's like an emergency abort.
You don't think there would have
They
been
they dropped the banks.
You don't think
and they
there
start
would've-
floating up.
you don't think there would have been a moment where it's like something's
First
going
sign of
wrong,
trouble,
and people are like,
They would have pressed
what
the
is
button,
this?
man.
No, but you don't think there would have been a moment of like, what the hell
Maybe,
is this?
and then boom,
Right.
that could have been the next thing.
Yeah.
Because there's maybe a moment. In that moment of reality coming to you, like, wait a minute, like,
I think there would have been first sign, and then that leading to the.
maybe. We don't know.
But even the would have been like,
Nothing.
no, it would have been like, what the.
No, like, I think it's like less than like 100 milliseconds, less than 50.
Okay,
40,
well, in those
30.
speeds, I am all obviously speculating, but all of that
Like,
air
completely
escaping.
crushed.
No, all of that air escaping, all that fast. No, I think it would have pressed against it for like a moment.
As soon as some
But again, I'm
vulnerability on the
anyway.
hull comes in, then all pressure goes and pushes it that way, and then from there it all just crumples. Like in a split second, it's as nothing.
I do still think there would have been an oh shit. At the very least.
Well, that's the question. What,
Maybe not enough time to vocalize. Oh,
I agree
shit.
that there's a debate And like from that moment, would they have seen God?
Anyway, does this add to our
I
conversation?
think so. Yeah, it's pretty deep.
To speculate
It's
about
topical,
billionaires'
right?
deaths.
The Titan.
We're not laughing, by the way.
Titan submarine.
We are not laughing at death specifically, and it's tragic. It needs to be understood.
I don't think there was a laugh.
Human life
or
is
not.
human life. The kicker is the
It's a current
decision-making
event.
the decision-making process that
Right.
led up to this situation.
Right. And
it
interestingly,
seems very, very on the absurd side.
you have
I don't need
many narratives surrounding
I don't need one.
surrounding
Yeah,
this. Which one is like, oh, there was a migrant ship where like I don't know,
I took a jab at one.
100 migrants died or something, or some number of hundreds
And nobody cares.
at the same time. So, but that was nobody talked about that. It was all
Yeah.
about the billionaires or whatever.
Yeah, and I only made a jab about the whole Epstein thing because immediately once it was made the news, the people that I know to be on my feed for being a little bit on the conspiratorial side immediately capitalized on it. Like, here's a conspiracy theory for you.
What was it about?
They were Epstein's clients and they wanted to disappear, so they set this whole thing up.
Yeah. You got lots of speculation, like as if they're gonna put proof forward or like some documents now came
Yeah,
out.
it's talking from
Like,
the
that's
same.
stupid.
It's talking from the
Dude,
same
that's
asshole as anybody.
That's
who's-
bots. That's Fed posting. It's bots. It's retards.
Which is ironic because the people that are saying it are like, we're not the bots because the rest of the information is bots. Cool. You've succeeded in convincing me. Not.
It's just sad, of course, overall, because you see it from all sides. These kind of blind accusations or whatever, or narratives, like just holding on to certain. You can just feel the tension of like us versus them, like some kind of battle is tense in the air.
And that's the
of
only. And that's the only
the
narrative.
speech.
That there's a battle. War. There's
Right.
war. Guess
It's
what that
war.
points to? Ego. No matter how you slice it, if you're us versus them, we're going to put you into our flame diagram.
Here you go.
Because war occurs, well, right there. And it's always presented as the gospel truth by some kind of a hierarchical authority structure. And the only people engaged in the actual warfare are the people on the bottom of that structure. And they're warring with another version of that structure. Plain and simple. That's what the diagram is saying. And the diagram is also saying that so long as that is the case, this is still ego. So it's trapped, so to speak, in this situation. So long as it's transactional, it's going to be war. That's the comment about the trading being how enemies communicate.
Right. Trade is a form of war.
No, it is.
The other, the outside, it's an
In-
ultimate ideological separation of you and them.
Instead of exchanging troops,
And again, this isn't necessarily bad. Think from the systemic point of view.
I am trying to keep going
Right?
towards like, now let's discuss the
System
system is
bad.
not being bad. Let's turn this right around on its head because
Right.
we always harp on the system, always, and we need to like actually make this like come clean in a sense. In that there is no model without system. There is no system without model, sure. I mean, we covered that several times. It requires model to sit underneath it. However, model does not rest in peace, so to speak, without system.
We've related before
Because of
to
entropy.
the neurochemical operating system and the social operating system. We've related those in the past
Those are very, very useful layers.
with model and system.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, fruitful
So the
line.
neurochemical operating system comes as is. You don't get to choose what it presents you with, right? Like you cut yourself, it's going to tell you, ow, unless you have a specific condition that doesn't allow you to feel pain, which is very rare.
Right. I'm most reminded of just the layers chart.
Well, the social operating system is a chunking mechanism for the neurochemical operating system.
Mm-hmm.
And the other point we made earlier today was
The
that
chunker,
was
as they
that
call it.
was skill was revolved around unchunking. In other
Right.
words, making
Being able to reverse that sort of process.
or in other words, creating such chunks that they are completely isomorphic with the neurochemical operating system to begin with. So, still chunks, but not exactly. If you remember back way in the day, I was talking about
This is,
mediation.
you're talking about refactoring right there. I
Yeah.
think, like decomposing but recomposing into a more healthier isomorphic format.
Using our APS language to do so.
Right. Memory refactorization.
Do you remember back in the day we were talking about mediation and speed? So hypermediation,
Slowing down to
slowing it down, and then never reaching the actual mediation
and this
layer.
is about the meditation of looking at objects in your perception, breaking down what is
Into
an
their
object
artifacts.
type to like go to the abstract, and then the mimetic, like a process. Is that the one?
So yeah, it's basically bringing down your concrete layer of your neurochemical OS into its abstract layer, unifying the two so that they're isomorphic. So an object is a type, a subject, an aspect. Everything is object now. So it's kind of like or it could be thought of as bringing the abstract layer up into the objective layer. So instead of types and aspects and subjects, you have categories for everything. You can see it as distinct things moving through space, affecting other things like particles.
I'm excited, man.
So there's two phases to this mediation. The one is like reducing the hypermediation into its so to speak representational format, and then paying attention to what it's trying to represent from below. So not only like slow it down, not in terms of its narrative, but the constituents of the narrative, right? Break the narrative down to its constituents, and then also breaking down the constituents to what aspect of the neural operating system are they expressing.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires an actual skill,
man.
because you don't get that readily. You get chunks.
I get it. You're talking about like the ability to adjust your perception in coherence with the neurochemical operating system, with how it works, being able to navigate that better, more intentionally,
Right.
the way through feedback and all that.
And so the social
To
operating...
deconstruct what we have automatically sort of built up through our lives.
Yeah.
Right? Through our history, we've encountered objects many times over and learned how to deal with them. Some of those like could be called traumatic and life altering.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And that they have to be decomposed in a way. So this is kind of like the journey of increasing coherence, I guess, is we have to go over our history
So in this...
and recontextualize it in
Mhm.
a more primordial way.
So
I
in
guess.
so in some sense, you can feel like what I'm trying to just say is like we're ignoring this layer. We're trying to just use this layer to discuss this layer. We're ignoring this layer. We're just using this layer to discuss this layer, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, right, we are actually also just doing something along the lines of we're taking this layer and creating a language for it up in this layer. We're then using these two
Mhm.
combined layers to
Right.
to reach down to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
next layer and use it to represent it up here. So in the one hand, you can look at us going down the stack, but on the other hand, you can look at it as going up the stack and combining all the layers into the upper layer. And that's the actual way to see the model.
Right.
The taking
You need
the bottom to
you
up.
need a representation in the higher layer of what is below it, and that
Right.
has to be negotiated.
And the argument is that that's the only way you're going to access it. Would be my argument.
Yes, that's the only way you access what's below. That's how the communication happens. And I was thinking about people communicating.
Oh, the
And-
network stack. Check this out. Representing in the application layer the structure of a packet. Or what's the physical layer description of what's sent across? Packet is, I think, is data link.
Right. No, it's the third.
Route.
It's a frame is the data link.
Oh yeah. So below frame.
Just physical.
So in your application layer, say you're
Voltage.
playing to get, say the application, the one thing it's doing is like it lets you put together the physical layer bits and bytes together to send across the wire. That's what we were talking about when we were talking about representation. That does
Mhm.
not exist on the physical layer. It exists in a representational layer,
Right.
way out of its
Interesting, isn't it?
way out of its and this points to where the problem with upload happens.
Right.
To get it to that layer properly, look, can you imagine what you can do at the application layer? You can represent it any which way. You can go willy-nilly with all of that.
Right.
And it will not match what the physical layer
Correct.
is doing.
Right.
Until the point that it does.
So
That's
But-
the isomorphism.
yeah, it seems like it should be obvious, or whatever. Like, but high-level commands have to be ordered and oriented such that when they execute, they go down the stack in a completely coherent way. Through the OSI model understanding, it's like unpacking and unpacking and unpacking through protocol each layer till you get down to that physical.
And you have to
Then
go
you transit through many physicals. Maybe it's fiber optic, maybe it's electrical,
another point of
maybe it's wireless.
Another point to make here is that you have to use the application layer here to send the specific bits that could be
Right.
isomorphic or
So
not
the question
isomorphic.
is the quality of that.
Because that's
that
your
applica-
interface.
The quality of the application that's dumping data onto the application layer. The quality of the app
Naturally.
has to have the isomorphism built into it, completely represented. What's below has to be completely represented.
So this
right?
app you're talking about,
And that's
is
the
skill.
isomorphism, a skill, a connection between the higher level understanding of the application and its code, and what exists out in the world.
in the wire.
Right.
Let's put it this way, in the wire, in
The
this
wire.
analogy.
Right.
Because in the application layer, like I'm saying, you can actually format bits into any pattern whatsoever and send that down the wire,
And
but it's going to be
interesting-
noise to the same application that created it.
Interestingly, you have at all these different layers the data has to go through, you have established protocols, which are often a given. Like you can select it from a higher protocol
Yeah.
layer, right? Like it's not like you have to reinvent
Like we
the
assume
wheel.
the OSI.
It's just that the
model.
stack has to be correct, top to bottom.
Yeah, we assumed an entire stack by saying OSI, for example. We assume an entire stack when we say the archetypes or with the ego or any of the one of these things. The ego is more of like a categorical clusterfuck of stacks, right? It's like ego can be like anything system related, any
Like,
program.
Even how, as a program, you can rely on communicating over the internet through IP address. Like you can ping another computer, based on the fact that your router, your local internet, your provider, all their transits
All agree on that address.
have that, and you don't have to care how it's done. It's not up to you, the skill and how that's done. Your application checks off a box, yeah, I want to use IP for this address, etc. And the data just goes down it.
Yeah, I think
Right.
what you're trying to get at is the fact that
The
there
application
isn't a
doesn't have to
there's
have the entire stack built into it.
Yeah, it has an
It
established.
can be open source.
It
That's
can
what I'm saying.
It taps into an established path created
Right.
for it, quote unquote, by nature.
Right, i.e. open source.
Well,
We can
And-
create that link there
we can
as,
take the
as opposed to
analogy
closed.
We can take the analogy further, right? Like you can walk on the ground because there's gravity by nature, kind of thing. Like it can go way deeper, right?
Of course, yeah.
So
we rely on that.
OSI
Our servers don't just fly off into space.
OSI is only useful insofar as saying, hey, you have units, you have nexus. That's all it's good for.
Nexus is the layer itself, you could say, of what it provides.
It's a way to make a unit for the next layer.
Hmm.
So the same concept goes into the stack discussion where you have
It's an interface.
signals bunched up under a particular grammar are an expression.
It's a way
But
of
on the
cataloging the interfaces.
But on the next layer, it's a single signal.
Because ultimately, we have to break down what's actually happening, and
It's chunking again all
speak
over.
in organizational terms. What do people do for the economy, for this economy, for that economy?
All right, so let's use all of that and say system good.
So system good,
being the
but
being the chunking part. Chunking
Chunking
happens. Chunking happens without skill. Chunking is weird and and chaotic. With skill,
Mhm.
it is ordered, and also chunking is a form of order.
Right.
So,
yeah.
is our order chaotic or
because
is our order ordered?
When we talked about kind of processing past trauma as a chunking thing, to the idea of chunking that away and boxing it up, that's a problem. The idea of dissolving those chunks, but letting them fall into new, more primordial chunks is the idea of kind of reprocessing trauma. It decomposes the
So we can't escape.
certain-
We can't escape the quote unquote our enemy self-reference. So to say we unchunked something is a way to chunk it into the unchunked. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like it's to remove it from one category and put it into another, and therefore it's still in a category, and so you
understand.
don't really escape
Of course.
chunking.
I understand, yes, that
The key is to chunk in such a way that is reflective of the components of the underlying layer. So
but that's what I meant by kind of dissolve the chunking. But you can never get away from the fact that you have a memory of things being that way.
Okay,
Like,
I think
we
we're
always
saying the
move
same thing,
forward in
and I
time.
want to paint a picture. If we think of a chunk on an upper layer as being these disconnected chunks from a lower layer put together,
Mhm.
we don't remove that from the upper layer.
Right.
All
That's
we
what I
do
said,
is
yeah.
okay, then we're in agreement. I'm just trying to paint a picture then. So all we do is we have this chunk, and then we have a bunch of, on the same layer, associated chunks to represent the lower layer representation,
Yeah.
connected to it by association.
So instead of some elaborate thing building up on this, you have a pointer to here's how we just break this thing down, and that's
Yeah.
all you need left for that memory, for all those things. It comes down to, like, there's a pointer,
Yeah.
and this is how it breaks down.
So in one sense, you're technically skipping to the layer below, but from the other perspective, you're not leaving the layer you're in, you're adopting the layer from below into it. You're infusing it with it, causing that isomorphism. And that's what really isomorphism is all about.
Because you're
taking
you're
that
following
stack and
you're following
bringing
this
it up.
pointer. You're following the pointer and then bringing it into emergence.
And this is also speaking about the car diagrams, this potential upload dysmorphism problem, in that this is where it all collapses, usually, when you don't have the right protocols to bring the lower layers into it. So if you don't know what bleach does to the human body, and you only think...
God help you.
And you only think that it's going to get rid of bacteria, and you drink it for that reason, I'm sorry, but your body is going to disagree.
It happens, though.
Of course,
People
that's
do
why I mention it.
Amazing
People drink
things.
fucking
People do
bleach.
amazing things even before Trump said anything.
Well, yes. Trump just made the problem more prominent. He put it into the forefront.
Right.
He just illuminated
This
them.
is what politics is.
And he did that only because he's a very terrible politician himself. Like, he doesn't know how to
He
play
just couldn't
that
hide
game.
it.
Has no idea how to play that game, so he didn't, and he just exposed what politics are to the rest of us.
Trump, the beautiful
I mean-
ham fist.
I mean, I wouldn't say exposed so much as validated.
Maybe he served a purpose for that.
He validated a lot of
That's what I kind
a lot
of
of
have
my
said.
suspicions.
About politics and all that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably his greatest gift.
It's got, yeah, it's a horrible gift though.
Well, for what we paid for it, of course.
Yeah, what we're doing is weird, to say the least. To you know, our home. We're shitting in our own bed, so to speak, like right on the pillow before we put the head down.
Yeah, I think like cultural stuff is like some of
And
the
it's
biggest,
diarrhea because of how
biggest
bad
thing,
things
right?
have gotten.
It's like how we relate to our neighbors, to each other, right?
You're welcome for that image, by the way.
Tell me again.
You're shitting on your pillow, and it's diarrhea right before going to bed. I'll leave you.
Okay, no, and you're not allowed to clean it.
No, 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 there's
we're
no-
going to bed.
You're going in.
We're going to bed.
So.
Let's get
lovely.
that thought over with.
Yeah, you guys mull over it, and we'll be back.
Indeed, indeed.
and parcel
Belief.
with taking the ontological matrix for reality.
Right. In the kind of stupid way, if you will.
Yeah. So the distinction we're trying to go at here is that system is not bad. Right?
System bad.
System is not bad. And to make that point, like really, really make that point, is that system is what allowed us to run away from claws and teeth.
Right. Yeah. Starting from the
straight up.
basics.
It
if you
allowed
will.
us. System allowed us to find
So,
the berry bush.
if
System
we're
allowed us
talking
to
about
find
something
everything
that
in nature.
the model, capital M model, Portman
Mhm.
model, if it's talking about anything, it has to be talking about something that is immediately apparent.
Right. And that apparent thing that it's talking about is always and fundamentally called system. So the model is reflecting the system, and the system is a way to
Right. And-
express model in various different contexts.
So, interestingly, system is above a horizon, if you will, of model.
Yeah.
Beyond a horizon. Horizon of expression.
Yeah, there is a horizon between the two, because that horizon is expressed by chaos and order. And that's like going back to our initial
Right.
statements,
At
in
the
that
very
you
start.
have a carrier, if you will, and if you take a section of that carrier and look at it, is it noise or signal? Well, that's going to be determined by whatever system is running on the layer above that utilizes said medium. Right? Like, that's what's going to make that distinction. So there is no expression of, say, model without using some kind of a system. So ultimately, there's a distinction between what we say system and the system, like the overarching system that we do tend to harp on, which is the runaway system, in the sense that it is a system that is built out of the same components.
I'm glad you brought that up.
But it has such a different way of operating with itself that it neglects the lower layers that it's composed of. And it doesn't do the
It's
things we
like-
just talked about.
It's also built from this primordial mistake. Like when we look at system model dynamics, there's a mistake that's happening that allows
I think
the system.
I think I
to
can
happen.
I think I can capture the quality of this mistake. So we were talking about a situation where we have so many layers of complexity. So if up top here you skip many,
Right. Everyone skipped is tragedy.
right?
That's what
Neglected.
it is, right? Mm-hmm.
So
Not modeled.
That's where it lies.
Right.
That's
And
where the
how do you-
upload fails.
How do you know what you don't know? That's kind of the problem
Yeah,
too, right?
How do you identify which layer you missed?
This is the big investigation.
Skill, hence skill.
Skill and fucking
There's-
time invested and proper model, like a model taking up
And not a
proper
static model, not a static model, a contextual one that shifts with the situations over and over and over.
The first thing about a model is who provided it, a charlatan or a guide.
Which could be both of which could
That
be
needs
yourself.
to be
Both
right.
of which could be even yourself.
That needs to be assessed in the moment as one of the first things. Is what I'm trying to discover bullshit or not? Right? And that's so interesting. We've harped so hard on that.
Made even tougher is that a charlatan could provide model, but for a different reason than what models normally
And
provided
misrepresent.
for. So, do you still take the charlatan's word for that aspect of model, but not trust the charlatan? You know what I mean? Like, there's like this
Potentially.
entire
Yeah.
explosion of narratives that can happen again in this,
Right.
which is tricky because.
And those may be
we're-
finer charlatans who would actually give the correct, you could say, or isomorphic material.
And that's what makes for the worst. What do you call them? Sorcerers.
And
Not
yet
sorcerers.
twist it.
The worst charlatans are in that department where they know membership, can navigate membership,
Mhm.
but
Right.
but are callous.
Exactly. So would use the varied expressions.
Yeah, for not giving a shit about the isomorphism that
Mhm.
pertains to any of it.
The callous, as we call it, a degree of hostility,
So
right? And that's kind of what we were gonna get into.
so
I
we,
think.
we have a bit of a dog whistling situation going on in that we have an elite group of people that are called the callous, right? That are pulling certain strings across this world
Right.
that, in some sense, undermine the thresholds of model.
Well, and we've described this story as something happening tens of thousands of years ago
Yeah.
to distort human relations.
What I wanna bring forth to the table, though, is that as not for not being a real conspiratorial theory, in that those people don't know what they're doing. This is not an act
The
of
callous.
the callous.
Right.
It's not
Correct.
It's not an act of malice. It's an
Right.
act of stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not giving a cabal.
And that's a very
we're not
big.
we're not giving an umbrella of a cabal to the situation.
That's a very big kind of overall statement of what this kind of ideology, if you will, or model is about. Is not to isolate this group or that group as the elite, the bad ones. It's like we're all affected by the same thing to different degrees.
So
We're all every one of us in the same boat. Doesn't matter what story through history,
Yeah. so
what civilization.
and I think this is worth mentioning. And I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's
I'm
it.
aware of it.
That's my point.
My point was more to, like, it's very easy to, like, reinterpret what I'm just saying to, like, this is a dog whistle for the Jews, right? Like, just like it is with globalism and globalists, rather, and all of that. It's
Right.
used in those
The dog
contexts
whistle
and,
issue.
where
We
there's
have to,
where's like an elite
which
group
we're
of people.
obligated to navigate.
Yeah,
basically.
there's like the idea being, of course, that there's an elite group that is in control of this, that, and that in the hierarchy. Well, what I'm saying is slightly different in that there is a group, but this group is disconnected not only from the bottom but from themselves to the point of where they're completely obscure to each other, and they're just doing their own thing
For the vast
randomly.
majority part, except on top of that, there is like control from above in potential situations of power where one can muscle another to say basically I'll kill you or this or that.
But this is like incident.
But you
this is more
you end
incident
up with
related.
this. We call it a pile now, don't we?
Yeah.
It's a pile.
Okay,
The
this
eagle
is
pile.
what I'm. No,
Right?
shit.
It does
It's a shit
stretch
pile.
up.
It's a shit pile, and here's what my point is that you don't need
We can't use
any
shit
kind
pile.
of. Here's the point: you don't need any coordination to create a landfill. You don't.
Right, and
You
landfills
just-
have
you
a peak.
just-
They have a peak which is a top almost like
You,
the best.
you just need to create garbage. You don't have to coordinate with
Right.
the next
And
billionaire.
so we
to
call
do it.
this a pile instead of a stack.
Yeah.
And this is a
Pile of shit.
developed probably a month ago, maybe two.
No, this is a
Just-
little longer, but yeah.
No, I mean that we call it ego stack for so long, but that's been changed to ego pile
That's very recent, yeah.
because a pile is more like a pyramid kind of shape in its structure.
So, yeah. So really, I'm trying to, like, put to bed the idea of any kind of like a cabal sort of thinking.
Yeah, no, I get
of what
that.
we're saying in
Yeah.
terms of the callous.
I think
Like,
it's good to have that
it-
out there
It's
too.
not a group that is connected to itself, right? Like they're callous not only about the model, they're callous about every other callous individual personally.
Except what certain muscles are pushing this or that way.
Oh yeah, like that's through the adversarial.
It's the market.
Henchment.
It's a market, though, isn't it? Of basically reward and punishment. I will punish you with your life if you don't do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like that
That's
from top to
essentially
bottom.
it.
That's us. Hell yeah, planet Earth.
So yeah, so we're not talking about a cabal. We're not talking about like an elite
No,
group of people.
just if you
pulling
look
the
at
strings.
if you look inward at the structures that make you participate in the market through your ego, you'll see that's Yeah, everywhere, and we all don't know as much as each other do, practically.
And the proof is in the output. The proof is really in the output that they're not coordinated. Not that they are, but they are not. And that all
it's kind of even scarier, though, isn't it? In a way.
Yes,
as opposed to like some overarching power.
It is scarier because their only possible output becomes garbage, which means that any talk of progress,
and
any
basically
development,
war is the flame at the bottom, which everything.
Oh yeah,
drops,
this is what happens in the
into,
garbage
right?
bin.
Right.
That's
right.
where
so
you
it's
fight.
kind of worse even thought than.
It's not coordinated.
Overarching.
And because it's not coordinated, it is worse.
But it's tried to be coordinated by thought,
yeah,
if you will, by
yeah,
rulers.
But it suffers from the upload problem. With never developing the skill, that never established. So the upload problem continues and
so
continues.
we're kind of positing that the
only
upload problem
garbage
as
exists.
a potential kind of solution to organization, if you will.
Yes. The isomorphism between download and upload is the resolution. And the isomorphism is achieved through common protocol. And common protocol is a skill to deliver and a skill to accept.
Right.
Two sides to the same problem. One problem to two elements.
Now, yeah, I guess I was going to say this comes up a lot in relationships, setting up that upload-download thing. But I imagine, of course, within guild membership, one kind of already has an idea of
It's literally taking what you already do and stepping it up a notch. I've always equated guild membership with maturity, right? Like that's what I'm talking about. You gain that skill on the personal level. You gain the same skill on the social level.
It's a very critical maturity, if you will. The step into adulthood, if you will.
Shunned stepped into adulthood because the social structure is actually very much against that particular point of growth.
Do tell. How
Well,
does society not like that?
Because society is built on hierarchical authority. So you're not allowed to mature past your role.
Of course. Now you're talking about
unless it's a very specific guideline for how you mature into.
You brought that up because this shows that anybody moving into that immediately sees a kind of a feeling of adversary all around. Suddenly you witness it.
And this is the difference between system bad and system good, if you will. The bad, quote unquote, system is like this disconnected hierarchical structure that doesn't actually employ its constituents.
Right. And like everyone
in
around
any
you
sense
is
except
just
for
rejecting
the roles.
you and hurting you.
And if you don't do your job, God forbid, you're going to be fucking foodless.
Right.
So not only are you like strapped into having to go into those situations.
Interesting. No matter how much we love any of the people around us, it could happen a slide in life to any
and then
one
it's
of
like
us
it's nothing personal.
off the grid.
Have you ever heard that
that
phrase? It's nothing personal.
In regard to that, I haven't experienced that.
I've been fired. I've been fired before. And
I mean, people
tell you,
sliding into like
that's always the case.
sliding into poverty and dying on the street or something, right? Like a family member, right? To help them or take them into your home or something.
Oh, okay. I'm just talking over you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just talking.
Just
over
bringing
you.
some
I
feels.
do
And
apologize.
we both, I think, had some narratives going on.
Well,
but yeah, just to see the idea that people around us can slide right off the planet.
so you see how
and
this
die,
is.
and we can
so
just
touchy.
watch.
It's so touchy in that sense that system bad, system good. Like it's almost impossible to like find that silver lining when
Right.
you talk about system as to where is it bad,
And
where
we
is it bad.
associate
Good.
like
Because
what let this happen. The thing that let this happen, all of its guidelines, is the system. We equate that, right? We blame it on
well,
that people can just die. It's on the system. So
Yeah.
we don't organize to try and
yeah.
fix, if you will, or change the system by
And-
having a completely oppositional view of it.
And here's what model is suggesting about the system is that you teleport from peak to peak of context, specifically. And the way those peaks are arranged could be so much further removed from the original peak in which you arrived to which you ended up
in the mountain range of meaning.
Yeah. That
Right.
that you can't have a literal system to account for all of it. You just need to pick up the system from where it appears. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
So
if you take
okay.
so if you take your context meaning from this peak to
So
this peak,
the normal
you're
idea
fucked.
of understanding the government, it's one centralized, unified thing. It's some kind
It's
of
a red herring.
godless contraption. But on this view you're talking about, you encounter the system where whatever you do a search on Google, or you go to your city hall, like this is where the system is existing. You go into it and interact with it.
And this is this manifestation now, and this is this manifestation now, and this
Right.
is this manifestation now, and it will never keep its own self-coherence because it doesn't give a flying fuck about itself. It doesn't record itself as existent.
The system?
Exactly.
There are records
There's
of contact.
There's records of records of records of records, but there is no records of the entirety of record keeping
So
and
I
the
feel
records
like
about that.
I feel like we're talking essentially about like Office protocol with the primordial archetypes and the idea of having accountability
Yeah.
as an office.
We're also talking about the same premise we've made a long time ago, is that the model only talks about itself. The system talks about everything but itself. And those two serve a unified purpose.
Right, but
It's a polyglottic coin
now
in action.
what do you think about a system that fundamentally supports education in its most pure form, education being of this existence?
So the system would then have to make sure that education is more of a quality than a quantity,
Right.
and then it would have to qualify
Changes
it.
everything, doesn't it?
So education would, from the guild perspective, education is very clear cut. Education
Mhm.
begins with the guild is the fundamental guilds broken up into membership,
This is like a grade 9, grade 9 level.
mediation, and networking.
Pardon,
Yeah, this is a grade 9 sort of rundown.
for sure.
So like but that's the constraints. So we're, aside from creating protocols, which is like a freebie, there's also the constraints, and the constraints have to be like, okay, how do you make this layer isomorphic? You can only make it isomorphic by expressing what is. How do you express what is?
Mhm.
Well, you have groupings of people. Okay, how does that work? Well, you have your individuals, you have the thing that groups them, and you have the group. Archetype, model, guild. And then,
Mhm.
how does that look like more pragmatically? Because guild dynamics is a pragmatic situation. Oh, well, members,
Group is interesting because group has to be defined
The
by so
model,
many
the mediation,
ways you do something.
right? Like
Sorry.
and it's only recognizing exactly the same thing I just said. The member of the group. It's just repeating the same shit, really.
Right.
The thing that unifies them. Oh, the mediation
But when you
element.
say the thing, that's to be discovered in some sense.
But it's not. It's just words to apply meaning to the same constructs that are over and over and over again are recognizable to begin with.
Emergent.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I'm using. Okay, you have a group.
Mhm.
Group has
It's
people
not
in it,
not even a thought.
and then there's a thing that
You're talking
connects
about
them
labeling
as a
or
group.
marking emergences.
Right. And so all of a sudden you have archetype, model, guild in the most strictest sense. But then what are those archetypes? And what are those models? What are those guilds? Well, this one is the membership.
Mhm.
This one is
Right.
the mediation that
And
they
like,
all interact through.
This
and this one is
this framework
the guilds that they form.
framework allows you to deviate from that type of structure and say, oh well, actually this group does this protocols or whatever, and like mix.
Yeah,
and
it doesn't
match.
talk about gardening or farming or any of those things for a reason, because that doesn't that doesn't actually distinguish them in any way.
Ideally, you have very
The tasks are distinguished, for
primordial
sure.
protocols that are just taking
They're
care
archetypical, but the primordial protocols are not describable. You have the provisionary protocols that allude to that archetype.
of course.
You don't
Yeah.
have the perfect human DNA molecule. You have this human DNA molecule, that DNA human molecule, and there's a certain set of rules that says that they are human, which are abstract.
I wonder if, like, in the future, there will be certain races of human that are more terrestrial, and other races that are like planetary, intersolar system
The
faring,
sci-fi scenario.
right? They're just built different.
Our exploration of space might be very short-sighted because the problem, the realistic
What, get resources
problem-
from Mars or an asteroid?
The realistic problem right now is that we were putting so much
Radiation?
debris into
Nah.
into the orbit that taking ships out
Well,
of it
at
is going
this-
to actually pose a huge problem.
it's
We're talking
the only
about things
reason.
that lack gravity
The reason
and
it's
friction.
not a huge problem, although can easily be seen as one, is because every speck of dust in orbit is modeled and constantly updated its position by active radar. So
But
you
with
can
dumping-
calculate, but at some point when
No,
you
we're
try
dumping garbage
calculate,
there.
you try calculate a rocket going out, and there's no way because the shit
it's
flying either way.
It's not the current amount of garbage, it's the rate of garbage being output into orbit. So we're doing ourselves the same thing. We're setting ourselves up for a shit pile. So what will eventually end up happening is that a rocket will have to actually pass through particles flying at incredible speeds that could actually fracture everything in the equipment.
Right.
So it's
Just because
it's the same
right
story.
now things are let go,
Yeah, it's the same story. We're looking at it as
We're
like
just,
a landfill.
fucking up some other shit.
Yeah. So I don't have too much faith in space exploration because I don't think getting off the ground is going to be a possibility anytime soon. Until we solve that particular issue. I mean, we might.
Well,
I'm not gonna
there's
I'm not gonna stop there.
International Space Station, isn't it off the ground?
It's like in the fucking hot zone for getting hit by that shit, and it's like that's why they have to do so many repairs that they do. It's because they
Yeah,
keep
man.
getting hit by
Got your
debris.
6-inch titanium or whatever they're doing.
Like, dude, like at those, there's no friction up there, right? So if something is going at like over 100K, over 1,000K right at you, could be very small.
Yeah,
but a bullet
it can
is
take
small too.
a ridiculously long amount of time to settle down. And kind of ironically,
It's sad.
what helps it settle down is more shit being in the fucking orbit. So it'll eventually just start, no, maybe not colliding. That's got to be so bad if tiny particles are colliding at that rate. No, we're just going to jack it up. It's going to get jacked and jacked until you can't.
That's what I'm finding
you
so
can't make
sad
it through
about
anymore.
this. Is that like, yeah, it's totally could have been such a viable
Right, we fucked it up already.
avenue of exploration, but we only did the exact same thing we fucking did here. Put a landfill. Right there on that landscape.
Right.
So, system bad, we have
Well,
landfill. System good,
It's called
don't.
externalization of cost.
can we discuss good system?
Yeah.
Because we're still harping.
Externalization of cost. It's cheaper to let the debris fly than to return it to space responsibly. That's the bottom line.
Want to talk about the good system?
So what is the good system?
The good system. Specifically the more isomorphic system.
Because, as we said before, model can't be expressed, yet not through system
Mm-hmm.
alone.
Like
There's no other way. It is through
You-
system that model can be expressed.
For example, activity happens in the ontological matrix. When you
Right.
run away from a predator,
And ontological matrix, I
there
think,
is a
is a
ground-
big one.
it's your perception of reality, basically.
Right.
The thing that you would like to call real, if you were to be a realist.
And it's like a pile of sound bites, which we've, as we've
Loaded concept,
illustrated.
for sure a loaded
Sure,
concept,
right.
but let's not get into the details, because I actually like to just use it as a platform of both holonic modeling and ego agency based modeling touch each other in that framework, right? It's not about the reality of the framework. It's so much more than that's where
Right.
phenomena
Right, right.
happens.
Yeah, I get it. So finally pulling this up here.
Yeah, that.
And so like the idea of system and model,
They don't look that different overall. Like if you look at the other corner, you got a mirror image, right?
like this matrix points to the fact that no matter what we do, whether it's isomorphic or not, whether in our inner insides we're doing good organization or not, we have to pass through, if you will, to this
Point of contact.
point of contact, which is a social operating system type of idea,
Yep.
for sure.
Which
where,
is composed of mythologies and sound bites and all that jazz.
where you've passed through expression to the outside world. Like you've just, through a horizon like a black hole, you've passed a message, and then where does it go? This is through sound bites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Or model. What does the bottom say?
on the model side, we have
Member.
holons.
Right. Right. Not agents, but members.
Right.
And we don't have ego, we have altruism. Right, so
So this is a equal playing field for both the ego with its market and like the holon with its polymorphism,
machine.
polymorphic machine, right?
Market machine, polymorphic machine.
Right. Two machines to create economic flow.
Yeah, the point of contact is the apt word for this. This is where reality, so to speak,
Right.
would be happening. Now, the real reason why I'm kind of like quoting reality and not saying reality really is because we're talking about dream.
Right.
And so reality is more like taking
Exactly, yeah,
dream
yeah.
for it's a psychosis.
So before anybody studies this chart, just know that this is what tends to get trapped in. People tend to get trapped in this idea of an ontology. That's what you see here.
The ontological matrix.
You
yeah.
see a juxtaposition between an ego-based ontology here,
So
with
the-
your
the-
agency and your sound bites, and a
So the individual who is
model-based ontology, right? With
So-
a polymorphic machine here, holons, members. The matrix is the unifier,
yeah.
and you've
And you
got
can
two
approach it.
sides to this chart. That's what I want to point out.
Yeah, you can approach it from this side or that side.
But we all play in the same field, on the street, right?
It's interesting I chose top and bottom as my divisors because I didn't intend to, but I think it actually also is illustrative.
It's illustrative in that the ego grows out of and is enabled by what's in the bottom. For one,
For one, it means that the upper layer once again has to manifest itself from
Right.
from the
Yes.
model.
From the bottom layer. From what's below.
From what it put forth into the matrix.
From where it came from.
And all of the sound bites and all of the mythology that
Right.
is created from the sound
Mhm.
bites is
So,
actually
I think
a representation of that.
weirdly, what we're saying here is that something like Portal Mountain could sit in as a system in this top
It does.
portion.
Not can.
Ah,
It does.
It does, doesn't it?
It does, which is why this side of the
Sneaky
diagram is
bastard.
not evil. It says not the bad side of the diagram. It is simply the more constraining aspect of it. Where nature sees opportunity, system sees risk, right? It's kind of like that situation. How do you come to terms with both? It has to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Right.
Because if you ignore one, the other one dies.
So you're talking about the fact that in this upper half, in our minds, there has to be essentially a unifying narrative. It all collapses down
I've said
down
that
to
before, yes.
down to a single sort of thing, and yet you've got these different considerations from both the chaos and the order.
Which they have to like incorporate it right into this. So these sound bites have to actually incorporate the bottom half for them to be isomorphic.
Hmm. So we're accustomed to demonizing this entire part of the matrix with the agents, through the ego, the sound bites, the market machine. Oops.
What really happens is that not the like I'm pretending to hold the diagram in my hand right now.
Do it.
Like if I were to hold it flat out like this, what's really happening is not the elimination of this part of it. It's kind of like a folding over, right? If you take this corner and fold it to the other corner, it should match.
Right.
That's what.
Through some sort of bisecting line.
Yeah.
Through the matrix.
So, yeah.
If you will.
Look,
just
that doesn't.
fold.
That's the only spot that doesn't change. Like myth becomes Portal Mountain. Agents becomes members. Sound bites become what?
Hold-ons.
Hold-ons. You know what I mean? Like it all folds back into each other. So the goal of our discussion isn't to eliminate the top right, the top left corner. Is to fold the top left corner into the bottom right, and to create a sort of isomorphism, not a sort of one.
It's always been just an interesting puzzle, hasn't it? Not like a war or some kind of conspiracy. It's just a puzzle.
Right, and our comments about war should illuminate that nature of the discussion. It's like every time you get war, you're just sitting there.
That's how it happened.
And nowhere else. So there's no folding going on in that scene.
Right.
And that's the disconnect.
By folding there, you mean like kind of coming into the other side?
Yeah, merging agency with membership, merging sound bites with hold-ons, merging the market machine with
and
the
then
polymorphic
letting
machine.
that be the system, if you will. Right?
Yes, you don't eliminate the system, you just get another machine. And a machine is the expression of whatever system you're in.
Le polymorphic?
So yeah, very not bad. And again, to demonstrate this point,
Agreed.
we need to think about the fact that if we did not have an ontologically, I believe this is reality, way of thinking to begin with,
This is going down layers. We're just decomposing reality.
it would have been
Continue.
very difficult to survive situations in which you need to understand that something real is happening. So it's a mechanism. It's not bad. It's useful.
Right. Right.
Like, if you're being chased by a wild animal, if you're hunting and anything, if you're foraging, if you're doing anything fuck all worthwhile doing on the fields to survive, you need to take what's in your perception as real.
You're talking about like the balance, I guess, of reification, in that it can be done too much or too little,
And relevant.
And there's
relevancy is
there's a
another key.
tendency in like advertising and mind control, if you will, obviously of reification. So it's something to watch out for. The various forms of
Well,
thereof.
that speaks to the vulnerability, right? Like if we don't have skill in the upload, the charlatan comes in
That's
and
exactly. I'm
and
saying
tries to install the
that has to be an ongoing
Mm-hmm.
thing to point to.
And the way the system is set up right now, not the system in general, but the way the system is currently rigged,
Pardon?
is to actually betray the upload. It's directly, specifically
By currently
angled by
rigged, do you mean like a specific
what
ideology?
we call civilization.
Civilization, which
The hierarchical.
I call ownerism plus capitalism.
Right. Anything to do.
I think I'm just throwing that out there.
Anything to do with hierarchy that is only spelled out on paper, and the activity of which flows out of that paperwork. So nothing.
It's a bit lazy.
Nothing to do with anything that's actually really happening. Just
Of course.
fucking
of course.
a world
Right.
in strictly in the imagination.
And there's a whole model to describe that, right? Which people hold to. Oh, I work for X dollars per hour.
Now, it might sound
My-
like you're not free to imagine such things, but that's not the angle we're coming at it from. We're talking about not having the ability to imagine such things, but to know what the fuck to do with those thoughts. That actually
Step further.
comes
The rarest step further.
that relates to the coherence.
Did you notice that we haven't talked down the degrees of coherence yet this time, and bring
No, I
our
didn't.
example
Shall we?
coherence?
No problem. I will. We have talked about them before, but
Well, because we've
let's build them up.
we're here,
Mm-hmm.
we're here.
Let's build them up. They're worth it. They're worth it.
So I wanted to pull up. There is a chart for this.
Ah, yeah. I remember this. So this is juxtaposing.
It's kind of a scale between
Model and system, yeah.
right, yeah, and the
Spectrum.
no, not model and system. We just spent all this time saying that they're not connected necessarily.
No, I said
that
spectrum
system,
first.
System can be coherent.
I said spectrum first, though.
See?
That's my saving grace right there. It's not a
Don't
juxtaposition.
do that.
It's not a juxtaposition of them. It's a spectrum of them. Right? They're not against each other. They're just like there's yin, there's yang.
But even that, I think we're gonna have to probably blow this apart.
Mhm.
But the reason I brought this chart up was because we were gonna talk about so
Callousness,
callous as the
maliciousness.
worst, right? So adversarial was one of our words, right?
Yeah, it's the easiest. It's this next.
Right. So
It's a step between agency and guest.
I know that people can't see it, but there's like 6 columns here. The second column from the left, so like starting near the
Self.
yeah, so starting with self. If you go down that, you go through guest and into
Agency.
adversarial, malicious, callous. Interesting. Guest, agency. I forgot about.
They're
That-
they're parallels from the two perspectives, so they're not different.
Interesting. So like agency, as in ability to
Process and input
do
and
something,
output. Yeah,
to
You can talk-
interact on the market.
yeah. You can talk to them.
Right.
So it's like a very neutral space, and also
Right.
guest is in very neutral space.
That's on the
So it's the difference is being walking
hostile
through.
side.
It's just like walking through the door, and just not walking
Hmm.
through the door.
This is very interesting as a way to talk about how we relate to people. If we feel like we must trade with them, then we're
Become an
into
agent.
hostile territory.
And they become an agent, yeah.
Right? If we feel like there's something more like a family sense,
They
where,
become a
like,
guest.
you just want to help.
Yeah, that's what's it. That's exactly what that's pointing to, even though it didn't mean to.
Right.
It's another one of those.
But that's where we are. We have to relate this to real life, right? The model.
Of course.
And so we've been talking a lot about adversarial as it feels like taking advantage of opportunities to dig in. And we're drawing on, as we alluded to.
So it's taking advantages of the opportunities without having an actual overarching narrative out of which to build that resistance from. So there's no mythology that's driving it. It's just impulsed responses based on disconnected programming.
In theory,
So
with enough of these events of impulse,
yeah,
it would maybe be gained into what you would call malicious, which is like a membership type of hostility. Maybe, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you process this enough, it kind of goes on the dark side.
Malicious is recognizing that there is a specific group out there that you want to be against. So it's no longer about disconnected adversarial impacts. It's actually it's not on the level of having.
That sounds
a
very
mythology.
religious.
It doesn't sound. It's not so much more of the mythological sense yet. There is just an overarching sort of distaste for any of that activity. So it's like being against gays. Why? My book told me so, but you're not going farther into it. You're not checking your mythology.
What you're saying here is the adversarial, as the first one, is just encountering something that doesn't feel good to them, and they react a bit.
It's not about ideology yet.
But on this next layer of
malicious,
of coherence, of hostility, if you will, to the malicious.
That's already an ideology.
All these experiences over time, see a number of them, you've accumulated them into one kind of overarching ideology, which you're going to use to download further onto reality.
So if you're a conservative, you are against gay marriage. Like you know what I mean? Like that identity with the ideological arc is like dictating downwards to you, is that no matter what, you will always express adversarial tendencies.
This has to be picked apart a little bit from an idea of some kind of centralized control of this narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody does that, but has their own encounter of the world.
Propaganda itself isn't a stable medium, right?
So it's not like... It's not a unified thing.
No, because propaganda in and of it's living in propaganda world, and propaganda is not a stable medium. Right. So it's going to send different messages at different times all the time. So it's not about the callous is the person who has a unified ideology, which could be separate from every other callous, and it is. It's your Elon Musk. He's too rich to be bothered to think about any of this. He just he cannot be bothered to give a flying fuck.
Okay, now you're talking about, it seems to me, an idea of progression. Elon Musk wasn't always callous.
No,
he was malicious before that. He was adversarial before that.
Yeah.
He was an agent before that.
Yeah.
Right?
He could be spoken to. He was a guest even before that as a baby.
Right.
But then he became the surrogacy of whatever information. Then he became an adversarial unit.
There's an interesting connection with, say, Musk's idea of reality and how well he can manipulate it, if you will, right? At this level of callous. And in which kind of, to me, evokes like a reflection of increase in coherence. It's kind of like on the light side, if you will, like the Jedi system. You know, like the light and the dark side.
The narrower the silo.
But they're both the same thing.
But the
which
narrower
is
the silo.
an interesting conclusion.
If the silo is very narrow, then yeah, it looks like it's very easy for him to manipulate whatever's happening inside it. But should the silo widen?
I know
which
that.
is why banning is the de facto mechanism for stopping any kind of discussion.
To shrink the silo.
Yeah, it's a constraint. Like, it's a constraint in overdrive.
Right.
It's constraint about the wrong thing, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
like
narrow,
it's not happening.
yeah, if you narrow in the silo enough, you get a very neat ego stack that is very, very, very interested in its reward and punishment dashboard.
And you're talking generally, not just Musk Network
No, of
or
course.
Twitter or anything like
Yeah.
that. But if you narrow this, what's acceptable, which is totally arbitrary,
Yeah.
as you mentioned before.
What that means is, like, if you take the dashboard metaphor further, is that your dashboard, the one that you can use, becomes very, very, very ill-defined in terms of which button is going to give you punishments and rewards, especially if you're on the bottom.
Of course.
So it's going to be at the bottom. What you have is a lottery fucking ticket system of reward and punishment, where you press one button. If I do this today, am I going to get shit on, or am I going to get my paycheck? I don't know.
Either shit on or paycheck.
Maybe both. Maybe shit on
Right.
and a reduction in pay
And this harkens
for taking too long to clean up the
Yeah, I
shit.
think last time we were talking about the fact that the ego stack and how society is constructed in these shit piles, if you will, is so unstable that it can flip at a moment's notice. And you find this when certain neighborhoods go up in flames, and suddenly your house is in the middle of a riot. Right?
That's one way.
Your whole thing, for example,
you've had entire countries flip from one to the other, like, within days.
That's what I mean. It's like
Arab
it's
Spring,
not
for
a
example.
solid. There's not a solid. Whatever you think was reality was not solid reality, right? And we get these intuitions and
Especially when it comes to, like, things like
fuck.
authoritative structures that are written in paper.
How do you rely on that? And then it's like, but we keep
People's
proceeding
good
as if
graces,
everything
you
is
rely on
normal, and just waiting for a collapse. Like the economy has
why
to
is
change.
why is
right?
the end of the world such a prevalent topic
so,
in today's
end of the world?
in today's
and
literature?
How to change the economy? Transition. How to transition from.
I haven't seen too many transitional talks, to be honest.
I
I've
just
seen
tried to pique your interest with the word.
I've seen attempts. I'm not gonna lie. Woody Woodrow. What's his? How do you say his name?
Almost rang a bell.
He did a
Transition.
He did a whole documentary.
But like how to transition the economy
Yeah.
to like suddenly be decentralized and like everything's available.
No, that's kind of the funny part. No. He was talking
Okay.
about how all the ills of the modern economy are progressing throughout the world, and like how it's just dumping garbage everywhere and all of that stuff. But
Just
his
identifying
end
things.
message was,
Critiques.
how do we control this? Well, with your dollar. By
Fuck.
not paying the companies you don't
Or being
like,
the best,
or the companies
ultimate
that you do like.
blame it on the market consumer to being too stupid to buy the things that they should be with their money.
And here's where it became a no-go.
Yeah.
Basically, right off the bat.
Because there's no education for that except somebody screaming, if not screeching on YouTube.
There's
and
no,
that's
there's
about
no,
it.
There's zero information about gift economy, for example. None. Like, that's not an option.
Right. I feel that's radical and almost unimaginable, but we talk about like this idea of the middle class still who maybe has
Upper
some
middle
little
class.
little upper middle class has a little bit of power and can give some money to charity or
I'm
to
talking-
direct things.
Just to be fair, I'm talking
We're talking
like,
of voluntary.
I'm talking your mom level of upper middle class. I'm not there, personally.
Right. Well, you're on your way.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying. I'm definitely
We're all trying. I
But,
just
like-
got a raise too. I'm proud about it.
Yeah. Well, you always have a safety net too. Like,
Right, and that's like the idea
you
of
do.
family sticking together and like, but more than that, like
But
in
do
society.
you see what level of actual support you need? Because my parents couldn't do the same things for me as your parents can do for you. And that's why I'm kind of picking on your mom right now. Like, I'm not picking on your mom personally. I'm just saying that level of wealth where you can feel like it's negligible, right?
Wow.
To support another level human being. It's not like it's
I
going to
see
be a
what you're
burden
saying,
to
and
you.
I totally appreciate that you
It's
brought it up.
it's a high level of actual.
But like, I didn't necessarily want to
I
throw
use-
that on her. Like, if
No,
she's
it's
watching
it's
this,
not on her.
watching
It's-
this,
it's-
like,
it's
oh,
more like an example.
so well off or something.
Okay. This comes from my personal experience. It's not.
Let
it's
me-
not-
let me
it's
respond
not
to
your-
that.
It's not your mom specifically.
I think that on the flip side, I felt a lot of shame that I can't provide for something. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
you have
when
a different life.
When you try to ask somebody for something or ask for a gift, you feel ashamed because you haven't provided for yourself. So who the fuck are you? Sort of thing. Like, society tells you this, right? Do you get it?
Yeah,
Shame?
yeah.
Guilt? It's guilt. I meant guilt, I think, when I said shame. Because it's entirely self-generated. That why
You-
don't I make enough money for my insurance policies, and why don't I do this and that, right? Meanwhile, I can sit here rotting
my experience
and
of
not
you-
get help, or I can ask for it.
My experience of you is that you did not rely on your mom to actually set yourself up.
No, never. But
Unless you had to.
thank you for
Unless you
that.
had to, and that's like it's the
Um,
same thing that I've done. Unless I had to,
Past is really a
yeah.
lot of just small things, but and some big.
But the main point of mentioning her at all was that she lived, in my experience, in a much elevated financial capacity throughout most of my knowing her.
True.
To such a degree that I am not like able to play around with the thoughts that she can.
That's true, but I feel like that's because of her passion. Like, she got in like the lawyer field.
Oh yeah, this is not a comment
And, like,
on her.
Decided to go back to college and like get into like this
This isn't-
lawyer field.
And this isn't even a comment.
Like, her career is
but,
astronomical.
but this is not a comment on her at all. Like, this is more like generalizing the capacity of financial ability
yeah.
to which she has access.
and which we're talking about when we say middle class or upper middle class. And what is the
You need-
reality of changing society?
So
Not outside of gunpoint.
So I'm using your mom as an example that you need this kind of financial freedom threshold to even begin building the guild.
Right.
Right? You need more
To be able to help the people around you.
You need that
And
times several to even reach back down.
that's,
Because nobody
so
else
much
has
the
that.
guild.
But there's nobody else that has that actual capacity to support it.
Is it weird that when you get super rich, billionaire, you can't
You don't do that. Yeah.
you can't connect anymore?
Yeah,
Is that
because you
weird?
don't even play with us. Those people do not compare themselves to other people. They compare themselves to people who are also rich, only.
So, and interestingly, the family generational connection has
So,
died.
yeah.
You could say over the years, and the wealth isn't being transferred from generation to generation. Typically, you go into the golden cage, you live your life out, you spend your money to live in luxury, whatever. You sold your home, kind of that was the generational wealth. Like, a lot of this is happening, right? It's not up to the kids anymore. It's just, I'm gonna live my life, and you do you.
There's that. I mean, on
So,
the
like,
wealthier
the,
side,
the
that used to be
idea,
like- it
the
used to
idea
be-
of somehow giving to your kids is even disappearing.
It's not disappearing. It's been disappearing for millennia because that has been happening on the rich side of humanity for as long as there been a rich side of humanity. Everything to do with marriage, everything
Sure.
to do with property laws, everything to do with all of that is a way to put that down into paper,
But-
that imaginary situation into paper.
At the same time, there's been a lot of families that have, you could say, unconditionally passed forward the torch, if you will.
Yes, I think your family is one of them. So
Maybe.
when I put your mom on the spotlight, I wasn't talking about like
That's pretty wild, man.
I wasn't
I'm
talking
going to
about-
allow it, but that's pretty wild.
I'm not talking about her.
Just as a socioeconomic class, if you
Yeah.
will, of having ability to even participate voluntarily in the gift economy.
Right.
The,
You had that opportunity.
These people don't hardly exist anymore.
Yeah, and you
If-
had
if
that
you will.
opportunity. That's actually why I'm putting her more on a pedestal than not. I'm
And
saying she allowed that for
I
you,
was saying-
even though that she didn't actually like transfer all her wealth to you, right? Like,
Like, yeah,
you're
you're
not
kind
you're,
of,
you're
like,
not the individual that
you can't
lives
help
off of their
but
parents.
misrepresent the kind of the relationship or whatever. But that's why I kind of came back with the idea of guilt, because nobody fucking says anything because you feel guilty, right?
I felt guilty
You
all
don't
my
earn.
life for not.
You don't
earning
earn.
anything, yeah.
How can you ask for anything? Like, it's your job to earn money, right?
Yeah.
And we're trapped
So-
in that, and this is a big problem for the gift economy. Just a simply psychological type of aversion
Yeah, and I'm saying
to being open to receive.
And
I
I'm
guess.
saying that the way forward for the guild to eliminate the guilt trap on the bottom and to
the
have
guild, not the guilt.
the guilt trap on the bottom
The guild trap
in the guild,
in the guild, right?
the level of finances of the most average member almost has to be on that level, like where your mom is coming from, simply because that there is less of a struggle to dip down into hopelessness, kind of a thing. Like there's way more to ride on. It's like a wave that you ride on, right?
In a very neutral sense, we're talking about the.
I'm not talking about your mom specifically at this
um,
point, by the way. I'm talking about the level of
We're talking about a model
capacity.
which sees the world in this way.
I would call it almost like a threshold of interaction with the market. There's a point of where it's detrimental, and there's a point at which it's useful and helpful,
Right.
and all of that. And the capacity to do so is not on my level of capacity, it's not on your level of capacity, but it lives in what you and I both understand to be what she earns, but for many other people it could be a different reference point. Like if you know a person in that sort of really upper middle class situation, we're not talking about how they got there, we're not talking about any of that stuff, we're just assessing the capacity
Well,
of action.
I think the point of it was to kind of bring to our consciousness, you and I, of the fact that some people do have the capacity to
Guild.
potentially, and I guess we all do to some extent, little things, right?
Little things,
But,
yeah, but
to really
overall,
contribute to the guild in a, you could say, meaningful way,
it has to
like,
have you have to
it can't be just
you have to
a
be
federation of the homeless.
yeah, you have to be comfortable within the system. And I'm not talking about the good system, I'm talking about the system. The fucked up system. The runaway system. You have to also be comfortable there. Because if you don't got the system's cushioning
Why?
to work with, all
Right.
of that is going to be opposed
Yeah,
by
yeah.
the system.
No, in a kind of sense, what we do is above a certain level of the system.
It's
On top of on top of that.
It's almost. It's actually has a lot to do with it. It costs more to be poor. So to achieve the same end for a less financial independent individual, well, takes more actual finances to achieve that end than it would for anybody who already has preemptive ability. A good way to look at it is shoes. If you buy cheap shoes because you don't have money,
you buy them all the
end up
time.
buying them frequently and therefore spending more money on them overall.
Right.
Whereas if you invest in a good pair of shoes, a situation that most people don't have available to them, that's what I'm saying. You gotta have that kickstart.
Or easily,
That's what I'm saying.
Like, you can look at somebody with perfect credit getting a nice little room or apartment for $1,000 a month. But if you don't have credit,
It's 2,000, and all of a sudden you're
could be
paying
double.
that double.
Yeah, right.
And you're the poor person without the credit, paying all that much more.
For the same thing.
Exactly. That's the point of putting your mom on that pedestal. It's that she has, and of course I'm guessing.
Now I feel like I've been blabbermouthing to Zhenya about how
Guilt.
my mom has helped me or something like that.
No.
Which-
I don't know.
You're kind of assuming, and
I know
this is
she
why
has enough.
I brought up the thing about guilt. Guilt is an internal process which stops you from asking.
If I had thought that your mom set you up for life, I would have never been able to understand how you could have bought a house and lose it and sell it at the end. How you are renting an apartment right now, and how you're just working an hourly wage. Those are not contributing factors to my thinking. Right? Like, I don't look at your mom that way.
Mm-hmm.
I only mentioned her because she fucking married Gary Goodridge at one point, and there was like, I remember very specifically living in my little tiny apartment.
But that wasn't like a source of wealth or something,
or pride or anything to that.
right? Yeah, like where she is
in my later years,
from her like legal legacy, I guess.
It's
right?
like in my later years, trying to do what I'm doing now, I think back on it and I'm like, the only way I can actually go for any of my higher reaching goals is if I had that kind of stability. And that's where that's coming from.
Stability,
yeah, like being able to dip so far into your finances that you don't give a shit.
To just take a school or something. Boom.
Can't do it. Like, I'm financing my car.
Right.
I'm not there. Like, I'm trying,
And
obviously,
it kind
but
of
I'm not
like
there.
brings up a sort of feeling of randomness to each of our like starting points and what that means for life. Right?
I
this earth, each of us start at some point on Earth.
I bitch about some of my in-laws because they were free-handed some shit so fast in their starting life, and then I've been looked down upon because I couldn't get a car for 20 odd years. Well, yeah, obviously I had other considerations.
More important.
Like,
but now here you are.
Eat. Yeah. Even then, I had to prove
now
to the government that
you're the man, Zhenya. You're the man
that
now.
my father can support me.
You are the man, baby. That's why you're here.
I'm 40 years old, and I had to prove to the financing branch of whatever bank is that my dad can actually foot the bill if I can't.
To try and take down the payments.
Luckily enough, my payments come out on my payday.
You should have made it by yourself. I think you would have. Really.
More money.
Down payment, right? They shift the risk and all that.
I paid the max down payment I could.
Yeah, man. I'm just saying, I think you hold your own.
I've shortened it as much as I could.
You hold your own, as far as I imagine.
Yeah. Also self-built. Also, what drives my notion of you do need a threshold of financial stability.
Nice painting, by the way. Look at your portrait there. Don't make her neck you again. Penelope.
How could you?
We just totally cut her out for this whole session, but that's okay. I was thinking we'd take a break, but
Yeah,
hell yeah, that's some good stuff. And totally appreciate it. And I know
To close it off again,
you know, bringing up family and all this kind of stuff.
The mention of your mom has not to do with my personal jealousy or with your situation. I do not think that your station in life is affected so much by her status, so to speak.
Attached to that.
Yeah, financially.
Right.
I've never had that impression. And again, the only reason to mention her in any capacity was the ability. It was not
actually
it
like
got nothing to do
and
with
what I was saying about
any
guilt. I haven't been able to even ask her for anything until recently, and like we've kind of built a bit of a relationship about that, where it feels more like guilt, and I'm very proud about that. So thanks for bringing it up, anyways. And to me, it's a confirmation that people understand the guild and what the gift economy means, and like how we have to stick together, and like it's meaningless otherwise. Like the market is fucking meaningless a lot of the times, right? Competition and all this bullshit.
My father enabled my car. That was a gift. My father-in-law enabled $500 of my $2,000 payment. That was a gift.
Right.
I'm paying back both of
exactly.
them, but that's not because they gave it to me, but it's because that's just.
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
The gift wasn't the money. The gift was the car.
I don't think any of us should feel guilty for having a demand. That's what it is in moral terms.
Like you need to breathe.
Everybody has demands.
You need to eat a piece of chicken once in a while.
The fact of advertising the demand doesn't mean guilt. Shouldn't.
You need to take a shit sometimes.
Yep.
Right? Create a dirty.
Speaking of washroom breaks.
I'm just talking about guilt. Nobody should be guilty about taking a shit.
Guilt. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And gift economy.
Yeah, so I really, really, really to put this to bed one more time because it's a dead horse as it is.
Give it.
I never mentioned your mom as a means for anybody to like actually piggyback on.
But like, and now everybody
as
knows
a comparison.
Like we both relied on our parents in some way to like help us a little bit. You know what I'm saying? At least.
And for some people, you need to understand that this is what's called privilege.
That's gift economy. This is not market exchange. This wasn't a loan, right?
And let's put it back to the racist discussion. It's also what's called privilege, the ability for others to do things for you like that, without you thinking about it.
Yeah, that's not a racial thing.
It's not a racial thing.
Everybody's.
It's just in the racial context, it happens way more in one context than the other.
In certain geographies, yes.
Because there's no items to.
When you look at certain geographies, yes, you see
discrepancies.
It's like starting with nothing.
Out
of nowhere.
In an equal
you're thrown in jail now because you don't have a house. Great, you're not a slave, but now you're a fucking prisoner.
Slave.
You're a prisoner now.
Which is what? Another word for.
Right. It's not that difficult, peoples. And be right back. What can you do when you live in the shoe?
To respond to your query about personal, yeah,
But this is our experience.
exactly.
And that's what
I
it is.
have so much.
We need to draw
I
from
have to
something.
be true. I have to be true, right? Like I
We
have
gotta
to
draw from something, yeah.
and that
Where
is
it's ungrounded.
my real experience. And I'm not even making comments about the status or any of that stuff.
Well,
I'm just saying that the stability that
In
we
some
want,
way-
what we want,
maybe you
is
don't
found like way beyond our reach.
in maybe in your connections with other people you are not aware of
Other avenues?
different types of people, I guess, different class. I don't know.
No, I'm strictly going by how much quantification
But like
can you absorb?
with the guild, the gift economy, we're talking about a specific thing where those with means
Yeah.
can take on the role of the corporation to satisfy demands raised through the institution, right?
Or another sense is that where satisfying demands is not a punishment. Right? Like you move above that line. That's what makes it so difficult.
Mhm.
That's why it needs to be like
Interesting.
that's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
wealth has to be part of it. In
That's
some sense.
philosophical. Isn't
Well,
it?
no, it's not so much philosophical. It's also an observation. It's an observation that wealth allows that freedom. Statistically speaking, it allows one to make those
Right.
choices to begin with.
Like the idea
Whereas,
of the Buddha coming from the
yeah.
middle class, upper
No,
middle class,
Way
upper, right?
way upper.
You know what I mean.
Like even the very archetype,
Leaving his palace to go
Right.
for a jaunt.
wife and kids and everything. Why was he able? Like this is one of the criticism. He left his wife and kids. Yeah, at the hands of very capable fucking servants
Right.
that would do everything to their bidding.
Right.
Like he didn't leave them.
Not to
he
mention, like,
didn't leave them like stranded.
Like a garrison army protecting.
Right.
walls.
Like that's not a that is literally not a normal life to live.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like bringing that aspect of it, like you've been so up and high and at 'em, and all of a sudden realizing the rest of those layers that brought you up there, which is in part and parcel with the same
Right.
narrative as
You could detect those when they're gone, as Buddha encountered.
whose journey was to explicitly relinquish those things to understand
Mhm.
the consequence.
We all have a moment
It's a
like
journey.
that, don't we?
I
The
mean,
journey.
I mean, as high praise I have of your mom, that this is your growing up had not followed the exact same trajectory. I'm fully aware of that. You are my Wendy's crewman. You you've been struggling through fucking call centers, banks, and other
Well-
shit to like get your shit together. And
We all have our own life to go through, right?
And-
Who is anybody to interfere with
and,
that?
and I've never known you to not live from paycheck to paycheck.
That's true.
I've never known you to not be that person. So
Likewise.
So all of that credence, you
Cheers.
know, I know she didn't like make it easy for you, like in that unfair way. Again, credit to her. I mean, how else would you have been able to understand me if she had done that?
That's like corruption.
Or yourself.
Corruption in a way, right? To shelter somebody.
Well, yeah. What do helicopters do for their kids if not ruin them?
Right.
Oh, all of a sudden you're sending a fully grown child into the social world that doesn't know how to deal with any social situations. Congratulations. You win. What?
And how do you teach that?
What did you just reproduce? Yeah, sure. You threw out your molecules out there, but
to some ways,
what else about them?
there are different cultures, if you will, to be received into.
Classes.
Right. There's a lot out there. Oh, there is.
Well, I'm pretty hung up on the whole upper middle class thing. I think that's a threshold that must be met.
As a kind of like, not a target, but
Medium.
a requisite, a medium for the gift economy.
Smoothiness, yes. It's smoothiness, if you will.
Smoothiness. We're getting back to the gift economy, right?
Always. It's always about that. That's the membrane.
It's not about smoothiness.
That's where we cross. That's where the ontological matrix becomes something different. That's where you start to see member versus agent.
In a kind of community, global scale, the world out there, what is it? Is it the market or is it the polymorphic?
Mm-hmm. Or
right?
nature.
Two ways completely of meeting needs.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an institution who cares about you to listen to your demands and advertise them promptly for the corporate establishment to then
Is that
give
institution
you
is
what
that
you
institution
need?
a solid institution, an emergent institution, a passing institution? Is it here one day, not the next? Is it
Qualities.
something? Is it something that
Qualities
emerges
of all these.
based on context?
Right.
All
and
of
the one
these
who
things.
provides for you, maybe it's a trap, right? To try and poison the well of the decentralization. That's kind of a rough thought, but
They're all rough thoughts, to
That's-
be honest.
it's all protocols.
We've established that we have
Yes.
no means to achieve what we want to do. That's rough. We're not in that
Right.
position.
Like you and I.
I don't have
yes,
that
right?
kind of finances.
Mhm.
You don't have that kind of finances.
But we do have
Access-
YouTube.
We have access to people, which is another economy.
We have YouTube, Telegram. Almost 100 people that like us.
I like it.
I like your hair. See, you got like a nice little mullet going there.
Mullet. There's nothing up here, down here. I did the whole thing. I never kept the back. That's just gross.
Oh, it's just Penelope.
It's so gross.
It's Penelope. It's not gross.
Oily and disgusting.
Well, that's because I haven't had a shower in 5 months.
So
Alright.
gross.
At least.
So, system good.
That's a tough sell. Tough sell. Usually, structure is railed upon as, oh, I'm an anarchist. I hate order. Fuck the state.
Restrictive.
Fuck the system. So
Restrictive, yeah.
everything that constrains you is perceived as an opponent.
That's system bad. So
System bad.
So where system good is that the fact that if we have a polymorphic machine,
Right?
system changes.
Which we do.
So from the contextual peaks, if you will, subjective peaks, when you teleport from peak to peak and you have a model for that, system is good. Because that model is the system. It's incorporated. The jumps
Right.
are incorporated.
Oh, wow.
They're not neglected. They're not
Check that
rejected.
scene out. Check that scene out. That looks wild, man.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna put that. I thought the camera was already oriented.
So system bad and system good.
Right. Is system bad or is system good?
And
That is the question.
And clearly the answer is neither. The system is the mechanism, right, through which anything actually takes place. Anything we call real, for example, right, is an ontological matrix reality. And it's distinguished from the non-real by a system.
Right.
It's just how
But
that
this
flows.
is through the absurd. This is the order versus chaos, if you will.
You've received a bunch of signals and you've put them
You're,
into an
you're
expression.
defining the signals in a carrier sense, right? Like there has to be a logic to this.
You give a top-down meaning to a bottom-up phenomena.
At each layer, as you stack up, right?
And we've qualified neglect as skipping layers. So if you were a physicist and you're stuck on atoms and you're neglecting all of the phenomena that happens between atoms and mind, you're just not applying the same thing for as many layers. You're just neglecting layers.
Which is fine.
For some things, yes. For some things.
Right. It begs questions.
That's the key. Not everything. You can't neglect those layers everywhere in the social sense.
Once you go up the stack.
You still have to account for, I don't know, things like people's thoughts, people's meta-narratives, people's myths, society's myth. If all of that is missing, it's neglected. It doesn't account for any... And sometimes it doesn't need to be there, but oftentimes, if you put it into a different context, you need to like, oh, okay, this acted as a catalyst for that. Or this created the material that was necessary for this to proceed.
This, the camera swaying. I think it came to an equilibrium and then started picking up again, maybe.
Resonance. It's a wonderful thing. It's so hot in
We'll
here.
see it over that and then over this one.
It's quite hot in here.
'Tis. And what to do about it?
Sweat.
Well, thankfully, we're only at 3 hours, 16 minutes, so we're perfectly on time, I think. Got half an hour left, and at that point, we'll pack up for departure, and we got 4 hours under the belt. Very interesting discussions.
So order being, system being good is an expression of order manifesting out of chaos. Together, it's an absurdity, regardless of which order manifests out of which chaos. It just creates an absurd situation.
What about system bad?
System bad has been defined quite uniformly as the skipping of layers to engage with isomorphism. So if you like skip all the way down to the particle system,
If you skip any layer, you have isomorphism or
Problems.
dysmorphism within that layer.
yeah.
Correct. They all need to be modeled.
So the idea is you bring up each individual layer
So-
recognized into the layer that you're at, so that you can represent it. And it's that
Right.
lack of representation
Right.
that causes the dysmorphism.
So in your reality, your ways of thinking, you must have models and objects which map to that which you're doing isomorphically. It's got to be good.
And down the layers. Not
Right.
just what you're doing, but like the kind of things you're affecting. So if what you're doing is affecting the physical layer, right, you gotta
Mm.
have be aware of the repercussions of the movements in that
Right.
layer. That,
And it's like
that are happening.
it's sort of like a waterfall. Once you connect to the layer below, it waterfalls down. Like if you've done that connection between what you're doing and the layer below, then it's all below is implied.
Which actually makes the work of it seem harder than it actually is. You know how like you made your comment about how the way I keep describing magic is less exciting?
It's not
That-
exciting at all.
Well, that's the point, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm talking about the lower layer being infused into the next layer in terms of representation, and of course that's not going to make it a very exciting
Right.
because it's not about
So-
those wacky mythologies that we're talking about. It's just
Your idea of magic is like along the lines of construction of order flowing
the
down
chaos.
through layers of
Yeah.
chaos
and the two stack.
as a skill. We'll add that on top of it.
And the horizontal and the vertical isomorphism is where the skill is applied, right? Like the magic is in that using the lower layer into resonating the upper layer
You know what?
skillfully.
I almost think like
So it could, it
the
could
idea
seem
of,
mundane, but
the
it's
idea
not.
of magic going through the lower layers, like almost don't even talk about that. Like it's nothing. But when you connect horizontally,
Yeah,
that's where a kind of magic thing happens. I think.
that's what I'm saying. The magic is in that arc, a horizontal arc. The vertical stuff that eventually does use horizontalism, if you
Right.
will.
You almost don't have to think about it. It's just
it,
happening.
it transfers to the medium. You know, that's
Mhm.
why you don't think about it. So your own brain could be like the agency of interpretation in there, for example, or the air could be the agency of transferring sound waves or whatever. There's another stack in the middle always.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you need to master that stack as well to actually do anything.
This is to me like the down
Actually,
up. The down up.
Actually, mastering the stack in the middle is what constitutes skill. To do the upload in the way that the download is supposed to have
Right.
made its way.
Yeah. I swear we've talked about this like a long time ago. First discussion of the card diagram. Like that's what skill is. That when you download, on the upload, like it's things are slotting into like some kind of
Preconceived
structure,
notions, yeah.
which is the structure is as isomorphic, not necessarily the exact symbology, right?
Yeah. The symbolism might change, the signs of it will not. Right?
Right.
Like, that's the distinction
That's what
between
I-
symbol and sign.
I'd hope to bring up. Thank you.
You can actually have the same sign occurring from different symbols,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what the
we always
final artifact
do kind of
is.
have that thing, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Down and up, different agents,
Mm-hmm.
different stacks. Like as a people as a stack, right? So many stacks, so many agencies.
So how about we try to make sure that we leave this on a note of the system is necessary.
I'm down.
Because ultimately, whatever thought you have to speak it, you have to go down through your stack layers,
Right.
expose it.
There must be a language lower to use to do things.
And in order to make use of it, you need a system. So you need what's called a formal system to encode a message onto a medium going down the stack.
Right.
To give chunks representational symbolic dechunking. Let's call it dechunking. You need to dechunk some things into a medium to send them off. Encoding.
Mm-hmm.
That's going down the stack. So, is there any expression of model whatsoever if you don't do that? Okay,
No.
can we talk about model if we can't talk about system? No. That's where we're coming down to. So the discussion of the lower layer can only happen if it's brought into the upper
Because
layer.
we know that we are expressing things using, in this case, our vocal cords being picked up by a microphone.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be that's a layer that we know exists with certain words. We'll call them English words, right? As
Okay,
our
English is another layer
objects,
that
right?
exists.
Right, you can have microphone recognition without English on top of that. So we do have English on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
and all kinds of things on top of that, up and up and up, right?
Eardrums.
Hmm.
And you have to have an eardrum to pick up any of that. Just
and
like
then
random.
further through ideological layers.
Sure, and then there's the conceptual stuff where it's like, if I say this, it means that.
Your
if I say
ideology
this,
is about cognition, right? And going up and up in the layers.
keeping the strange loop in mind while you're interpreting
Mhm.
what we're saying.
Yeah.
It's so system isn't so much as bad as it is the thing that requires all of the skill to be put into use.
Right.
Hence the concept of maturation. Hence
I like that.
like it
You
is
say
maturation.
that the
into
system
that
is
sense.
what requires all of the skill. The skill is an application. When we apply ourselves, we use skill.
And the system isn't inherently the problem, so to speak. It's how it is made to behave with the inputs that it's getting from the self-reflective element of the neurochemical operating system, and how well it encodes itself into that layer after the fact. So not only does it encode the chunks, but pieces of itself into that layer. So we made the analogy.
Self as context.
So we made the analogy like you have a bunch of pieces here, you combine them to create a chunk there, but then also there's an association of this chunk and this chunk and this chunk and this chunk and this chunk in the very same layer in which they're chunked to begin with. So you have a reference point in the same language to the constituents of the thing that made the thing at the same time. So you can unravel it, so you can examine it, so you can turn and twist and look at it from different perspectives. All of that.
The meta available.
Right. In the same space of the thing. So the meta and the thing are in the same place, spoken through one language. Hence, again, the APS language, to bring so many layers and squash them into the upper layer of subjects and context and all of that stuff. And requirements testing it. Which is all broken down, back down into the most universal programming languages we know at the moment, without any real change.
Nice. Very nice.
And I think the last thing I have to mention about the distinction between order and chaos itself is that whatever is ordered can appear in so many different variations while not changing what that order is.
Right.
So like we can speak two different languages and say the same thing and
You're kind
using
of-
exact very different sounds.
You're kind of talking about like the idea of like an idea bomb just coming from the heavens and marking its imprint on many different contexts. It looks different, but it's the same kind of thing.
So if you were to use Russian, it'll look like this. If you were to use English, it'll look like that. Hebrew, like this.
Right. But ultimately the same bomb or whatever.
Same bomb. All the sound waves are going to be a complete clusterfuck of... Like, you can't derive one from the other at all, right? that the connection does not exist on the layer of the expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You would need to go up or down
Your narratives
as usual to
into your narrative to get combine
Right.
it into a soundbite.
like, what does that mean? What does mine mean? Let's meet somewhere in the heavens and come back down.
A soundbite is another way to say word versus number.
Soundbite as a stretch of the word, a long word.
Number is more like algorithm. Word is more like just meaning. Straight up, wide algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get 3 apples? Do you count them individually? Do you count them as a group? The expression of 3 apples can come in many different ways in terms of the mathematics.
Sure.
2 plus 1, 1 plus 1 plus 1. All of these kind of different notations.
A triplet. Nice.
3 bracket apple. You know what I mean? Like, you can have so many different ways to write down that one meaning, and this expression means that, this expression actually means that, this expression means that. They can be all converted one to another, but the only way you know that is to access the upper layer and say to yourself that this is the same thing.
I think by accessing the upper layer you're talking about, it feels like diving into context too. Like, what does this actually mean? To unpack it.
Well, I mean, that's how mathematics tend to work. You start high, you select your objects, you bring them down low, they give you other objects, you look at them high, you ask yourself, what the fuck does that mean? That gives you the choice of how to arrange them together with the objects of the previous iteration, if you will. And so there's that jump in between layers that keeps happening if you're doing isomorphics. Oh wow, a new word, isomorphics.
Isomorphics.
So like it's an ongoing, it's a feedback process. You can't just assume shit. You have to like, oh, there's the representation. How does the representation work? You put it, juxtapose
Right.
it against representational rules.
I feel like
See what you get back.
You're talking about mind games, if you will, and their connection with reality, like how it actually pans out.
And you can also make an equivalency with talking to God, if you want. Like with, not to get too esoteric, like when you ask mathematics a question, it answers, right? There's like this, it has a feature. That language has a feature.
What's 1 divided by 0?
A vertical graph, a vertical line.
A line, you say?
Well,
In what context is this line?
you take an XY graph, right? 1/1 is a diagonal. You keep that theory going, and you keep moving your line vertically,
point.
and what you get is that the slope of a 1/0 is a vertical line.
Almost.
No, it's if you apply
In
limit.
theory.
No, if you apply limits.
If you agree with the limit.
That's what limits are. Limits are like to take an impossible question and draw the conclusions out of the possible.
Yeah, why not?
questions.
That's what I'm
That's how
saying.
you find a tangent line
Why don't
on
why
a
not?
curve.
Why not do that?
If you to find a tangent line on a curve, you take 2 points on the curve and you keep bringing them closer together until they reach 0 distance.
Bow chicka wow wow. Boop.
So each movement of the dot adjusts the angle of the line. So the combined adjustment
But of course.
gives you your final resolution. So it's an indirect mechanism to do a direct thing. So you can't.
0.333 plus 0.111
This points to the fact that even if you do have only statistical information,
0.666.
if you only have statistical information, it is still possible
Yeah.
to derive
It's like
specific results. Not always, but for certain situations like calculus, it definitely does mean that. Like if you can't figure out the answer at the point,
it's true.
but when you
I
move
think it's true, yeah.
but when you move to that point from one angle and another angle, and it always converges, what it converges on is the answer. Even if you can never reach the actual conversion, if that's why it's called a limit. You can only reach this limit
You're a limit.
through logical reasoning,
To agree.
but not
Hallelujah.
through physical means.
Oh, it's fucking amazing. I understand. 1.000 unlimited.
But you do understand how, like, if you take 2 points in a circle, and they do this, and then you move them closer, and then they do that, and then you move them closer, and then do this, and then they do that, and then do this, and then if you carry this all to its natural conclusion, this is the actual slope you get, even though you can't get the point.
The slope being basically tangent
Yeah.
of the radius.
Yeah, touching it exactly at one point.
And we all believe, I believe it's true, man. I believe the tangent has a perfect 90-degree angle.
Limits literally define the limits of representation at this point. What they're saying is that when you have such a limit, here's a workaround. You step outside of your conventional method and use a secondary method to combine the results you're getting so that they match, avoiding the particular point of miscalculation that can happen.
The point of, you mean the limit as a miscalculation. It's too much.
It's using a pattern to fix onto a value, fix onto a value that otherwise cannot be extracted.
What do they call this? Like profession. You gotta think there's a whole profession there must be for like solving the limit between
Mathematician.
yeah the
That's
true
the- that
true
is the
mathematician.
They are the explorers of the mathematic language, specifically, and they're not explorers of realities at all.
So
They're-
their problem might
It's all about what the
be-
meaning of symbols is.
might be to encounter scenarios like this. And
Goodell gave us the best scenario to encounter to discuss,
and be able to talk about it.
because Goodell. So his project was a response to Principia Mathematica.
Right.
And Principia Mathematica had tried to establish a very, very authoritative mathematical hierarchy of rules.
Of everything, of the universe, if you will.
And what Goodell did is that he took that very same rule system
Mm-hmm.
and used it to describe the layers all over again.
Nice.
Or, in other words,
Do you think Gödel would have happened without Principia Mathematica?
No,
as a structure?
He was a response to it.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
So they tried to establish a very specific hierarchy. And what he did is basically say, okay, once I'm at a specific layer of this hierarchy, I'm going to repeat the first layer of the hierarchy. Regurgitate it all back. Because the hierarchy was there to do one thing: eliminate self-reference. Like literally, the goal of the people that
Right.
wrote Principia Mathematica was
Interesting.
to remove all self-reference from mathematics.
That's so fucking
And
interesting.
what Gödel did is point to their set of rules to eliminate all self-reference created against all assumptions a self-reference. He used their rules to denote the very same self-reference that they've worked so tirelessly to avoid.
Gödel is glorious, actually,
and
in how it came about.
And here's the brilliancy of this phenomena is that in a formal system, that has axioms and theorems that follow rigid rules from the axioms to arrive at their theorems, right? So you have your axioms,
Right.
and then you have your rules,
Academically accepted.
and then you could say if anything times 0 is 0, then no matter where I encountered that in my symbolic representation, reduce it to 0.
Okay,
Just like formal rules.
that's like right whitewashing.
So he's using all of that, and he's basically saying, okay, you can derive a statement that says, I exist in this formal system. The contradiction comes about from the fact that
From
You-
below,
you
it's
can't-
not provable.
you can't use any theorem or any axiom to arrive to build
To
up.
arrive at that statement, right? It's not provable. In other
Right.
words, didn't come from anywhere.
But the way it's written out and the way it's chunked, basically, is stating that the system is actually arriving at that statement. It's
Right.
in it. It's
So-
right in it.
If you use that structure, you see that's what's happening.
So there's a statement you cannot ever arrive at through axiom.
Yet it's obviously true, but you can't arrive at it from below.
And it's true not because of the axioms, it's true because it's saying, I'm not provable in this system. You follow the axiomatic paths and you definitely confirm that this is not provable in the current system. And yet,
So-
here it is.
Is this statement?
It's true. It's true by virtue of statement on an upper layer.
So who made this statement?
There's no who made the statement. There is the fact that the
No, no.
statement exists within the system. It's expressible within it. You arrive at a point where you have an expressible statement telling you the truth, and that truth is that this truth cannot be arrived at through axiomatic symbol shunting. That's what's making it true to begin with.
I think that's why you have to know who said it, because everything comes from context, and somebody saying something has an implication on.
The formal system said it. It's arriving at its own contradiction. It cannot arrive at that statement, and because it cannot arrive at that statement becomes true. And that statement is interesting in the sense that it
What's the
exists.
statement?
and
I
it-
exist. Is that the statement itself?
I cannot be proved by
To-
the system
to
in
not
which
exist?
I cannot be proved by the system in which I am interpreted through. So the system you're interpreted through has axioms. Axioms derive theorems.
This points to model. This points through absurdity straight back through order to chaos.
That is absurdity.
Fuck yeah, buddy.
That is absurdity. So yeah, so to recap, the model is set up such that we are looking at formal systems. The idea is that the formal system is going to make statements.
Every system
called
is formal.
theorems,
Systems all have their myth.
and then
Right.
we arrive at a statement that is specifically true because it does not appear from the setup of the system.
Or in spite of the fact that it appears from the setup. It's true in its own language.
The setup verifies it, but it never arrives at it. You can't use that
Right.
setup to arrive at the
So-
statement, but the statement's existence is
This
verified
is,
by the setup. So it's a top-down phenomena versus bottom-up.
It's a phenomenon called emergence, often I think, where from the
Yeah.
bottom up comes the order, and this is upload itself. Remember we were going to talk about
So-
upload and download, the conflict? This is upload pushing up,
Yeah,
regardless of what you as order think.
And this is what makes the who so fucking nebulous.
Who?
There's the skill. That's the skill. Where did that statement come from? Because it cannot arrive from the medium. The I of it.
You're
I
talking
do
about
not
like
exist in this system.
an
The I of it.
increase of order, if you will, and then in our minds thinking about this order and receiving statements like "I exist" or "Here I am,"
Exactly.
or like other kinds of
They're
stuff.
emergent statements that cannot be found in the layers below. There's
Like
no
causally, like through causality, you can't like
right.
piece it together.
You can't do that. But what you can still verify them is what
And
the
that's-
Goodell's law is saying is that that's not invalid. It's like a manifestation
No,
of
no.
that situation.
It's because
So there is I from
whenever
complexity.
we encounter one object, we encounter that object every single time through our history in our past, and like so many things flood into our lives and our ideology, our world, like before our eyes. Like I think we encounter a lot.
So if I can put it on its head a little bit, there is the other statement: I do not exist, which is also true.
As like an ego statement, right?
It's the same
True
principle.
in that medium. You
It's
can say that.
Right,
True.
because like there are no axioms that lead to that theorem. So
Right.
That is true. So I exist and I
And
do
yet,
not
how do we
exist
say
are
that
both
it
true.
is true? How do we say it is? What's our proof?
That's the point.
Is.
Is as a divisive line.
Is.
Is a very divisive
Between
line.
existing or not existing, right? And to say, oh, it's a binary thing. It's either 1 or a 0, instead of what does it mean to exist? What is this thing that's processing reality?
It's almost like which direction the photon went. Those experiments that can never get a clear answer because every time you measure, it goes both ways. Every time you don't, no. Every time you measure, it goes a single way. Every time you
With, like-
don't measure, it goes both ways, and
with,
there's
like,
nothing you
waves.
can fucking do about it.
With waves where it has certain like heat map kind of wave ideas. Whenever you run a photon through a two-slit experiment, on the end you get just
Oh,
waves.
the cancellation
waves like,
stuff.
Like, let's say horizontal waves across it, strongest rate in the middle.
Well, whenever you actually,
and then the waves diffuse.
if you run two waves on water through two slits, you can actually get a very great example of what the fuck they're talking about. Because what happens is that on the when the single wave crashes through the two slits, they first of all refract, so they become circular.
new
They become
thing.
circular.
In a way.
Like no, like I'm talking about like actually half circles. So you
Yeah.
had a straight wave going in.
Dude,
You have half circles. They're refracting.
because the
So all of that
barrier they
refractions-
went through has a gap in it, which is just a straight gap,
Okay, but it also
like a 180-degree gap.
There's also
is nothing.
Once you pass that kind of barrier, there's always a torque given to the wave.
From the outside and all that. Fine.
Now, if you have a straight wave coming in into two slits, right? What you get out of the two slits are two semicircles.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. So there's a
Yeah.
torque given to the outflow. All of that combined.
Torque was just a weird word, but yeah, we were both thinking about the same, like the water table experiment.
Yeah, so
Right.
now we have semicircles going out, radiating out, and then we have waves rising up double the size, and we have complete cancellations, and we have everything in between. So the directionality of the waves does make sense, and there's the lack of difference in speed. So if it's going, I'm adding torque because that energy was going forward. Now that energy got twisted.
So like,
it's going that way.
The interesting part about this is if you shoot even a single particle over those double slits,
oh yeah,
it will still create the pattern on the end.
Yes,
and that's, I think we gotta
that's the
make
the
a
kicker.
comment on that.
That's the kicker about the entire thing.
Single particle at a time behaves like a wave.
No, single particle
mean?
at a time behaves like a particle.
No,
particles,
because you shoot one particle after another. They are all particles.
If you don't measure.
What do you mean you don't measure?
If you measure which way the particle went,
you can see right away. You got a photograph back end, and you see even though you shot one single photon at a time, yet you have these bands of interference.
Yes.
As if they interfered with themselves.
If you did not record which slit it came from, if you do record which slit it came from, you actually get two bands of the pattern exactly where the slits are, as if light was traveling in a very straight line. So if you have a measuring device that tells you which slit it went through, the pattern on the back is not.
Does it not end up doing the interference pattern at all? If you determine which slit it came from, by knowing which way
it starts to agree with you. It just agrees with you. And if you don't know,
it does both.
It just basically goes.
It weirdly does both.
You don't know, I don't know.
It weirdly does both.
And and no matter how you slice that experiment, it's been doing the same thing. So they've used things like sometimes you will have a mirror that will divide the light and sometimes it won't. And all of that kind of stuff, and it will take different paths, and it's still if you divide the light and you know what you're doing, you're gonna get the exact response that you're looking for.
Right.
But if you don't know, it will behave as if it went both ways.
It's up to your own mind.
And there's no way to reconcile that. There's just zero known ways to actually fucking reconcile any of that. So, yeah, you can either get the interference pattern.
This is a problem. You do not. So, Zhenya, is this not a problem straight from the bottom of physics all the way to the top of what is cognition? Do we have a connection here that Portal Mountain could...
That the top affects what happens at the bottom, in a sense? We can't make the implication that there is one top for the bottoms.
As always.
Each time you go
this
up a
is
layer...
fascism.
Yeah, each time you go up a layer, you have multiplicity.
Right.
So, I think the effects that we are noticing with, say, physics...
This is open source, too, because we got to be able to interact with our operating systems, our social OSs, to interact.
Yeah, I think there's a connection between the chunking, the way something is chunked, and the repercussions that you get out of the formal system into which it's being fed through as chunks.
Right.
And so, with physics, we're seeing that happen with assuming light is this, assuming light is that.
I think you just talk trade guild in a way, because you're talking about the outside and how it is, and the inside and how it is. It felt like trade in a scientific way, which was really weird. I associate trade with market and interaction, monetary.
Well, ultimately it should, because at the end of the day, whether light is a wave or a particle, it's just a way for us to see. The layers that are really concerned with what light is don't give a shit about the mathematics. I'm more concerned with seeing traffic in my way than I am with fucking the meaning of the velocity of a sparrow after a tornado.
Right.
Like, those are arbitrary questions compared to the fact that I'm about to crash right into this person.
And that's context, right? It jumps you right to the most relevant type of thing you could be thinking about, right?
And I think this is why we don't actually perceive, in the natural sense, differences between light as a wave and light as a particle. Because for survival as a species, that is not the most concerning element of light.
No, not a lot of people think about it either.
In fact, its interpretation is up for grabs because there's so many things that don't necessarily interpret light accurately.
But like,
You can say our vision is fairly accurate, but what is light to a leaf? How does a leaf see a world? And it's very interested in light.
like I think when you think about human organization, you think about a lot more down to earth things.
But
Just
really?
not visibly necessarily, but how we interact to each other with each other, right? Like not just a visible spectrum.
No,
thing.
I don't think that this is the case anymore because I think, because of the system-heavy inclinations.
Oh
that
yeah,
we're
the
taught.
reaction to everybody is like you're an enemy. That's what the reaction's happening. But
I'm just thinking that with a heavy dose of indoctrination by the system, the questions that you're raising are actually taught to be neglected. I don't know how many times
Right.
I don't know how many times you've been discouraged from this particular path by other people,
no, I
Personal.
know what you mean. Lots, yep.
but every time you mention it to people who are not doing anything to do with the path, their universal reaction is like, why are you wasting your time? You're not making money. You're not doing the thing for you. You're not going to Disneyland. You're not whatever.
And it must be a deep thing because you have to meet people where they are in their own adventure with their family or whatever the narrative is.
Speaking
That's,
of deep, that
yeah.
alcohol penetrated quite
Yeah.
well.
It has been a good day, has it
Oof.
not? And actually, we're about 5 minutes out from our pickup time, so
Smoked on.
as it has been great. And 3 minutes 55. 3
So-
hours 55 minutes.
So how would
We've
you
got one
so
or two.
how would you characterize system not bad as a statement?
System not bad. The need for organization, which is obvious, necessitates structure. Period. You go ahead. We got 1 minute.
What about the order and chaos?
We can all do it. It's not esoteric.
I think, in some sense, the thing to come to terms with
It
is
involves
that
feedback.
is
Don't
that
forget.
order itself is in essence chaotic in the sense that
Right.
what is ordered in this moment is represented by order in that moment
Through absurdity.
in another moment.
Because
and
over
that-
time,
and it's not
every
the same thing.
every map that's trying to understand reality,
Has to shift.
reality shifts second to second.
Moment to
So,
moment.
Moment to moment.
I don't like to use second to second
No, I know.
because that's a very
I
quantified
was trying to
piece of time. Moments definitely
moment.
aren't.
2 moment, right?
So for us, a moment could be Planck time or centuries, depending on the actual layer being discussed.
Well, I for one am very pleased with our podcast today, and I think.
If I ever talk to you, I am again sorry.
Oh no! Actually, this time I feel like you didn't overtalk me. I felt we had just a great conversation, and
We never mentioned the person, which is okay.
we hardly even got to that. We hardly even got inspired. Truly,
Not the person, the situation.
Because we
reflective
wanted to
of-
discuss the degrees of hostility into hostile, right?
Yeah. Too bad.
But we laid the foundation, and with that, I'm gonna cut her off. Gonna call it